Morning, honourable members. I think we should start in 1 minute. So if you're getting your tea, coffee, drugs, whatever, let's just make sure we do. Honourable Galega, are you well?
I'm well, Chair. Thank you very much for asking.
No, no. Hey, I am a survivor.
Yeah, we have to survive.
At this stage, my job is costing me more than VAT, so they can do what they like at this stage. Right, I think let's get going. Good morning, honourable members, and to all the team from the Parliamentary Budget Office and all the, I see the Treasury team is also here today. I also get the special privilege. It's not bring a honourable colleague, and we have one meeting today. It's not bring a girl child to work, but I have a student who is here today, Jordan, who is observing proceedings and will be job shadowing me, at least for today. I don't want to give her the impression that members of parliament do no work. I try to give her the impression that we do important work. So welcome, Jordan. I hope you enjoy parliamentary proceedings. Parliamentary proceedings by themselves are public meetings, and therefore it is a fairly open one. You can follow it virtually. You will get to engage today, so welcome. Let me, in the light of that, we have received a few apologies. The one was Deputy Minister Sarupin sent an apology for today's meeting. We've also received an apology from Honorable Kwangwa of the UDM, who could not be here today. He's on an international study trip, I think. Those are all the apologies I've received today. Are there additional ones? Honorable Galega Mazibugo.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable Lekhanyana is going to join us a bit late. He was waiting for the bus, and there was no bus. But he's on his way coming.
Is he on his way?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other ones?
We are here in full force.
In full force is Honorable Wakeland. With that, so we will note those three apologies. So just by way of agenda, we've only got today a presentation from the Parliamentary Budget Office, and then the outstanding minutes from yesterday will then be tabled today. And then we've got a few announcements just to talk through arrangements for Friday and also the public hearings next week. That was an item left over from yesterday. So I want to, if I can ask for members' indulgence, that towards the end, if I can ask Mr. Maubane just to talk us through the arrangements for the hearings on Friday, so that, or on Monday, sorry, I apologize, Monday and Tuesday, so that we can go from there. With that then dealt with, that is all the items on the agenda. May I ask for a member who wants to move for the adoption of the agenda? Honorable Wakeland, you are noted. Is there a seconder for the adoption of the agenda? Thank you, Honorable Bateman. With that agenda being agreed to and apologies noted, it is my privileged to open this particular meeting formally. Welcome the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office. May I ask in the same light, yesterday we had the FFC here, and given, and I looked through this particular presentation, obviously it has some different inputs given relative to the briefing that you had with the Standing Committee joint. There are some aspects that are different, but in the main, there are some themes that are similar. I say that to mean, if I can ask that we don't have to repeat the information that has been shared previously, if I can ask for the PBO to, we want to leave as much time for engagement as possible. I'm going to press you to say you will have half an hour to present. There's a lot of slides and a lot of information. In fact, given that, I might overindulge you by a few extra minutes because I can see the panic in the room, but you can't. I want to edge you though, because I've looked through the presentation. There's a lot of information that you don't need to read. Members have read it. So I want to urge you to say, let us keep, you will have until 10:30 to present. And therefore, if I can ask, I want to give members as adequate time as possible for them to be able to engage substantively. Let me underpin the brief. The brief is quite straightforward. We are in the process of utilizing the Money Bills and Related Matters Act to the best that we can, which means that the political negotiations that are taking place around the budget are but one aspect. Our job is to make sure that we serve South Africans as best as possible, and the politics present an opportunity for us to exercise the Money Bills Act, keeping in mind procedurally that this acts as an engagement that this committee is tasked to do. We will then receive the information as you have it. You know that we will table a report with a number of recommendations that go. So I would keep your powder dry so that we can exercise what recommendations we put, so that ultimately we can use the legislative mechanisms to do our best around the budget. So if you follow my logic, I'm trying to say to you, let us be intentional about how we use this time. There is a special request from Honorable Bateman that I said we will table it formally today as part of the resolution. Honorable Bateman, that will make a request to the PBO, and so we will then table that towards the end of the meeting, if that's okay with you. That's 100%, and then we will take it then from there. With that in mind, I have indulged you. Welcome, Dr. Janji. I will hand over to you and the team, and then you can take it from there.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, other members and colleagues. We appreciate the opportunity. Ideally, Chair, you spot on. We don't want to go through the details. We also appreciate the engagement with members as well. Thank you so much for that. I think I'll just do 1 or 2 slides, just give you an overview. But I think what I wanted to do really is to remind ourselves that, okay, sorry. Okay, I can just move to the next slide. Okay, this is an outline. I'm already trying to get into the not waste a lot of time. Yeah, just go to the to a background slide. I think what I want to, last night when I was sitting again reviewing the slides, I thought to myself, it's very important to also always bring the interplays between the entire framework, the budget framework as a whole, and just to emphasize that the budget, had really set out clear. There is clear national development strategies that are put out in place, and the budget really, we see it within that context. And the fiscal framework, which we discussed last week, had direct influence in the allocations of the resources through divisional revenue. So it's important to always look at that interplay. So I thought I should emphasize that, and really to highlight again to say our briefing really start with looking at the key socio-economic realities that, in our view, this divisional revenue has to be seen within that context or impacting those, and look at the allocation within the 3 spheres, and how does that allocation really interplays quite well with the priorities of the seventh administration. In particular, we look at the trends of spending within the national, provincial, and highlights the impact of the fiscal framework and the division of revenue itself. We'll also, one of the additions, you're right, Chair, there's a lot of repetitions, but one of the additions is really to talk about the financial health of municipalities, and how the division of revenue addresses those through the appropriation, the division of revenue, conditional grants, and other measures that are in place. And largely, another additional information that we bring today is the impact of the data updates on the provincial equitable shares and its implications for service delivery. So that, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. And I think more importantly, it's how this allocation, this division of revenue impacts the realization of these conditions. The situation that we'll be starting with. I'll stop there. The first slides, Chair, which I see my colleagues are looking at me, I didn't talk to, really gives an overview of, remind ourselves in terms of how the different spheres functions. So when we're thinking about, these issues I just mentioned, it's really within these spheres to understand each role of the national sphere plays a very important role providing leadership into the, and policy directions. But a lot of work is done at the provincial level when you look at the social wage and some of the areas, and some of the national security areas that are centralized, but also then looking at the role of the provinces on those specific matters. But I think the idea is to, when we listen to us, when we debate this is a framework from which we expect the allocation within the DORA is expected to be considered. I will give to Dr. Sekatani to take us through quickly. Colleagues, let's just summarize some of the key issues. I did not read the slides as the Chair was saying. Thank you so much, Chair. Colleagues, Dr. Mapula.
Thank you, Dr. Janchis. Honorable Chair, honorable members, what the last part that Dr. Janchis mentioned is about the division of revenue, which provide equitable share to provinces and local governments to enable them to function to meet their basic services and obligations. So when we look at the slides that is presented there, it talks about the principles that guide the equitable share and also the review of the equitable share. They have to be equitable and fair, they have to be objective and impartial, responsive, they have to be stable and predictable, robust and sustainable, they have to be based on assigned function and avoid perverse incentives, and they have to be transparent and simple and consistent with policy and have higher quality data. Next slide. So when we look at the equitable share and revision and data availability, so the equitable share, provincial equitable share consists of 6 components, which serve as a guide to allocate the equivalent share. So you have the first one, education and health, which are based on the demand and the need for education and health services. Then the other 4 components enable provinces to perform their other functions, taking into consideration the population size of each province, the proportion of the poor residents in each province, the level of economic activity, and the costs associated with the running of the provincial administration. So the formula is based on objective data, so each component is updated annually to reflect the changes relative to the demand of public services across the provinces. So in the 2024 MTAF, the provincial equitable share formula continued to use the 2022 midterm year population estimates instead of the 2022 census to inform the population figures in the formula. This was because at the time, most of the 2022 census data needed to make the annual technical updates to the formula had not yet been made available. Stats SA has released the more recent population estimates through the 2024 mid-year population estimates, which will then supersede the 2022 census data and therefore more suitable to make updates to the 2025 provincial equitable share formula. So in terms of the economic activity component of the provincial equitable share formula for both 2023 and 2024 MTAF periods was not updated with the most recent regional GDP figures. This was because due to the pending review of the methodology used to determine the regional GDP figures, so Stats SA concluded its review of the regional GDP methodology for the first time since 2019. The economic activity will be updated with the most recent data. So the rest of the formula has been updated with the preliminary 2024 data published by Basic Education on school enrollment and learner unit record information system, tracking system database. So the data on health for the 2023, 22-23 and 23-24 financial years and the 2022 general household survey for medical aid coverage is used to update the formula. Only the poverty component of the provincial equitable share is not updated with the new data, as the income and expenditure data required to make the annual technical updates to the poverty component was not yet available during the time of determining the public provincial equitable share formula. So looking at the impact, so we had this slide to sort of like indicate what impact does it have when the formula is updated with the new data. So we look at the school age population data that is updated with the 2024 midterm year population. So these sub-components are used, and also the enrollment, the statistics on the enrollment data, which is obtained from the Department of Basic Education. So these components are used to calculate the weighted share of the education component for each province. So we can see that the update into these weighted averages, they give sort of a small change into the weighted average, whether a positive one or a negative one. Next slide. So the revenue raising capacity, the national government has the largest revenue raising capacity, and the revenue generated by national government is shared to other spheres of government to support various services and initiatives. And the provinces have limited revenue raising capacity but significant spending responsibilities. Therefore, they receive the second largest share of the national raised revenue. Municipalities collect revenue through property rates, user charges, tariffs for services and fees. The revenue contributes towards the cost of providing basic services such as sanitation, waste management, electricity, and water. Next slide. Lisa?
Good morning, honourable members. I will be taking you through the situational analysis across the three spheres of government. This is an entirely new section, so please, if you would indulge me, Chairperson. Next slide, please. So the budget 2025 did mark an increase in some function groups since the 2024 MTBPS, but the scale of the proposed budget adjustment for several function groups may be insufficient to address the backlogs that have constrained the public sector, suppressed economic growth, as well as weakened resilience of households. In 2025, the real average cost of household food basket increased to 5,152, up from 5,079 in 2024. And honourable members, if you can look at the graph on your right-hand side, the bars at the bottom, the average cost of household food basket exists the real value of all social grants and the national minimum wage, leaving many vulnerable households significantly more exposed to hunger as well as nutritional insecurity. Next slide, please. In the budget, honourable members, the National Treasury did commit to shielding vulnerable households from the proposed VAT increases through above-inflation social grant adjustments, expanding the list of zero-rated food items, and not increasing the food levy. However, the measures alone may not sufficiently protect vulnerable households from the broader inflationary effects of the VAT increase. The Competition Commission did a study on essential food pricing monitoring, and that report indicated that the price of essential foods remain persistently high despite lower producer costs as well as fuel prices. This suggests that retailers are not passing savings to consumers, or at least not doing it adequately. An increased VAT will disproportionately burden middle-income and low-income earners who, as shown by the graph at the bottom, typically spend over 68% of their income on essential items such as food, water, and electricity and housing. Next slide, please. Although social grants support around 28 million people and have contributed to improving food security for millions of poor people, significant challenges do still remain. In 2023, 9.3 million people, as shown by the graph on the left, experienced hunger, while 8% of households were affected by severe food insecurity. The graph on the right shows that households, primarily dependent on grants as their main source of income, experienced notably higher severe food insecurity, with rates reaching 14.4% in 2023. Female-headed households, honorable members, had higher rates of food insecurity than male-headed households. And studies have shown that in South Africa that there's an unequal distribution of unpaid work by gender, which perpetuates gender inequalities. What we hope to see from the budget was a sound policy initiative to incorporate gender-responsive budgeting in public spending decisions. Next slide, please. Honourable members, the argument made by, in the budget that South Africa's VAT rate is low relative to peer countries ignores the extreme wealth and income inequalities present within the country. This slide essentially shows that the bottom half of the population holds negative wealth. Meanwhile, the top 10% holds at least over 85% of the total wealth in the country. By contrast, in the peer countries that were used by National Treasury for comparisons, wealth and income inequality are relatively less concentrated. So because the wealth and income is better distributed in these countries, people within these countries are less vulnerable to the regressive effects of higher indirect taxes. Next slide, please. Honourable members, this graph essentially illustrates the dark disparities in household spending across the different income groups in South Africa. It shows that most of the spending by low and middle income group is to meet basic needs such as water, electricity, housing, and transport. And in contrast, higher income households their spending on just that component exceeds the entire household expenditure for the bottom 40%. And if you can take a look at the green bar of the different columns, you see that wealthier households are able to invest in their well-being and financial securities, while low-income households spend almost entirely their whole income on survival. So it's important to see the disproportional impacts that the proposed tax measures will have on the bottom and even middle-income groups, and that they have little to no capacity to absorb rising costs. Next slide, please. This is just similar to the other slides around the inequality using the Gini coefficient. You see that South Africa is placed at 0.63. We rank amongst the highest countries Treasury itself used for comparisons in the budget. This inequality is pronounced not only it's pronounced along racial as well as gender lines, as shown by the graph on the right-hand side. The graph shows that nearly 3/4 of white-headed households are located in the upper quintile compared to 14% of black-headed households. So against this backdrop, regressive revenue-raising measures proposed are likely to exacerbate inequality across racial as well as gender lines. Next slide, please. Since the onset of austerity measures in 2012, South Africa's official unemployment rate increased from 25% to almost 33% in 2024, signifying that this crisis can no longer be ignored. The expanded unemployment rate, which includes discouraged workers, increased from 35.6% to 42.1% over the same period. And youth unemployment, honourable members, which is often described as a ticking time bomb, remained above the national average at 45.6%. So the proposed VAT increases, again, that have been justified by comparing our VAT to countries with higher VAT, also don't take into account that these very countries have lower unemployment rate, which ranges from 3 to 13.4% in 2024. So they have jobs and they have incomes in these countries. Next slide, please. In the budget, the National Treasury emphasized that key spending increases will be directed towards critical frontline services, such as crime prevention. The budget for this function increased by 6.3% in nominal terms. So it's from 250.4 billion in 2024-2025 to 266.1 billion in 2025-2026. And around 50% of this amount is allocated to police services in this financial year. However, you'll see on the next slide that despite this increased funding, the number of funded police posts remain unchanged at over 188,000 throughout the next 3 years. And this represents a reduction of over 9,800 posts since 2012. So this is deeply concerning, particularly in a country like South Africa, that in the latest statistics showed that we recorded around 75 murders per day. And so although the statistics show a decrease in the various categories of crime, there's still an urgent need to capacitate our law enforcement rather. Next slide, please. The slide is just going back to the previous slide that just shows that the police-funded post remains unchanged over the next 3 years, and the slide at the bottom shows counts the number of funded positions, shows the police to citizen ratio. So for every one police officer, for every 338 citizens rather, there is one police officer. But this figure, honorable members, does also include administrative police. So the number could actually be as high as 427 citizens for every one police officer. Next slide, please. Honourable members, I'll cover the next 2 slides together in the interest of time. But just to give you a quick overview, this figure essentially compares the number of new university applications in the light green bar against the number of universities, the number that universities can accept, which shows a great concern around the capacity for universities. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this slide and the previous slide shows that our higher education system relies on a limited number of universities. If I can draw you on the draw your attention to the orange bar graph on the left, over 35,000 matriculants who achieve bachelor passes were unable to secure placement in public universities, primarily due to capacity constraints. And to give you a practical example, the University of Johannesburg, as of January 2025, received 360 applications for first-year admission, but could only accommodate 10,500. And I looked on the website yesterday, that number has increased to 600,000 applications, and they could only accept 10,900. So many of our universities do face severe constraints in expanding their physical infrastructure to accommodate an increase in student enrollment, which underscores a huge gap. So the substantial reduction in subsidies for university infrastructure from 2.98 billion rand in 2024-2025 to 1.3 billion rand in 2025-2026, that's in nominal terms, may further exacerbate the pressures on overall university capacity, including the availability of affordable student housing. Next slide, please. Honourable members, in the budget, the National Treasury noted that the revenue generated from the new tax measures will help fund key priority areas, including basic education. And so in terms of basic education, over the medium-term funding for this function is set to increase by 61 billion rand. The National Treasury noted that the funding increase aims to retain around 11,000 teachers in classroom. However, despite this positive step, the funding increase falls short from repairing the years of spending cuts, which have contributed to pressures in provincial education that departments still continue to face today with teacher shortages. As of 2024, the average learner to educator ratio for state paid educators increased to 35 learners per 1 educator. That's up from 34 learners per educator in 2023. Our average learner to educator ratio is higher than the countries with low VAT rates and are yet to be better resourced. So it's important that also we recognize that this average does also mask a lot of disparities with many schools in townships and rural areas experiencing even larger classes. I'll be quick. Next slide, please. So essentially this slide shows the doctor to patient ratio, and you'll see that in South Africa, we have a 0.31 doctor per 1,000 patients. That means we have 1 doctor for more than 3,100 patients, and we lag behind countries that have lower VAT rates. And also we lag behind what is recommended by in a WHO report. And adding to this challenge is that the current new graduates outpace the funding that was proposed in 2025 for healthcare rather. Next slide, please. These are the last 2 slides, honourable members. I won't go into detail. I just want to mention is that despite some progress in delivering basic services, there are a number of people who still experience who go without access to water and refuse disposal. We must carefully consider that within the budget, the National Treasury did mention that they plan to enhance infrastructure development through partnerships with the private sector, but we should ask the question, what would that mean then for future affordability, especially for basic services like water? We can go to the next section. Thank you.
Next slide. Thank you. So members, the Division of Revenue Bill provides the equitable division of nationally raised revenue between the three spheres of government. These diagrams show the actual outcomes over a period of time, which also illustrates the aim of government to increase the proportions of transfers to provincial and local government spheres of government. Next slide. So members, despite the above inflation growth in some of the spheres, the allocations to provinces and local government, the real per capita spending that considers inflation and population growth is actually declining over the 25 medium term. Next slide. Members, further to the division of revenue between the three spheres of government, 66.9% of the 49.1% share allocated to the national sphere of government is further divided to for transfers to provinces, local government, and other institutions. You will see of that 49%, 5.9% is transfers to provinces, 2.4% to local government, and the 58.7% to other institutions. Next slide. Members, the figure on the left shows the revised estimated division of nationally raised revenue in 2024-5. The estimation is that transfers to local government will amount to 9.5% at the end of the financial year. However, when own revenue raised by local government is added to the nationally raised revenue, the local government share amounts to 34% of total revenue collection within the three spheres of government. Next slide. Members, although no rules exist in terms of the percentage spent on compensation versus transfers, comparisons between similar departments could actually guide policy decisions, specifically for efficiency gains. One example, the Treasury also emphasized this one, is like the National School of Government, a very small department, spend 29% on COE, and they transfer almost 50% of their budget. And this department will now actually consolidate with their entity. So this is the kind of arguments that you can make with just looking at the different allocations per economic classification. Next slide. The tables show the conditional grants transferred from national departments. So in terms of the transfers to provinces, the largest proportion of conditional grants is for education, health, human settlements, and transport. On the local government side, the largest proportion to municipalities is for municipal infrastructure and human settlements. Next slide. Members, these are just all the departments that has increased by more than 5.5% between 2024 and 25. Most of the increases include funding for the implementation of the 25 public sector wage agreement. Money was allocated for the COVID-19 SRD grant, the modernization of SARS, teacher assistance in basic education, the South African National Roads Agency for debt repayment and the maintenance of backlogs for the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. PRAZA's getting additional funding for the rolling stock. Water trading entity for the second phase of the Olifants Management Model Program. And then there was also an increase in a transfer to the IDC. Next slide.
Good morning, honourable members. I just want to remind members that the budget is written in nominal terms. So it's very important that, particularly for this committee, to think about the real per capita changes. So although numbers might look like they're increasing, what happens when we take into account inflation and population growth? So in this slide, which members have seen, we've noted that there's a positive development, that in the medium term, we are no longer seeing a significant decline.
Sorry, can I just ask it's just otherwise, if we don't have clarity on this issue, the rest of the presentation follows on from there. Have you pegged inflation? The previous slide was on the basis of 5.5%. I'm assuming
that's nominal.
You are presuming you are pegging it at that. Is that where the 5.5% comes from? And is that what when you talk about real per capita and nominal growth, is that what you're pegging it against? I just want to understand
No, so the average inflation in the medium term is 4.4%.
Okay.
Right, so in the previous slide, we're just highlighting, because we can't obviously highlight all the different votes.
No,
so
I've got you, yeah.
Yes, yeah, so that's why there's a
So
difference.
that's the benchmarking at
Yes.
5.5%, and then on here you've gone.
We've gone to the real per capita analysis
Got you.
to show
I just
you
wanted to
what's
get that.
actually
Otherwise,
happening. Yeah, so the previous
the
slide is
logic-
nominal, and this slide is now, or the next section I'm talking about, is the real per capita analysis.
got you. Thank you, sorry.
But if I may, the budget review also has the National Treasury's projections for inflation for the next few years as well. So
Medium term.
those, we use the National Treasury's projections for inflation.
Yeah. So just to continue on here to say, basically between 2016 and 2017 and 2027-28, what you'll see is that we'll be spending about 700 Rand more per South African based on this new budget. In the MTBPS, the number was significantly lower. We were going to be spending less per South African or citizen than we did in 2016, 2017, which is why we see this as a positive development. In the next slide, similarly with economic classification, we show that, I think the biggest highlight, and members of course have seen the slide, is to say that there's been changes to the allocations or what has been projected for the contingency. So initially in the MTBPS, the contingency reserve was supposed to be, or was estimated to be 20.8 billion in 2027-28. However, in this new budget, the 2025 budget, the estimate is now only 11.1 billion. So I think there to raise to members the questions around how are the contingency reserve estimates being made, and why have a contingency at such a high level for 2027-28. And the next slide, please. As members would have heard me continuously say, that there's no such thing as a social wage, as the whole budget is a social wage, and that people who, of course, have better access to basic services disproportionately benefit, right? So people in rural areas who are not close to hospitals per se, we might say we're spending all this money on that, but they're not necessarily benefiting, as much as others who are in proximity. But just to say that the social wage is now increasing. It had initially declined. So this is social wage based on National Treasury's definition of it, but also saying that there's significant backlogs that still need to be addressed. So even though we're seeing slight increases, that the backlogs might not be addressed. Next slide, please. So here, looking at real per capita in terms of health, I think this is particularly important to members, given that, yes, health is increasing in the medium term, but to say we've used CPI here, right, the projections from National Treasury, but as the Minister noted, medical price inflation is about, on average, 9.5%. I looked at the last quarter, medical price inflation was actually 13.9%. So actually, these numbers are not as high as they look. It looks like it's going to grow in real terms, but it's actually lower than that, given that medical price inflation is eroding the expenditure being made. But also importantly for members, the United States funding cuts to PEPFAR and USAID have not been factored into this budget. So that's going to have to be an ongoing discussion, and the question is what will happen in the adjustments in relation to these programs and how they'll be funded. Next slide, please. So here, similarly, we talk about education. The numbers are now increasing, but we know that in the past, we're coming kind of from a low base this year. So the revised estimate per learner is 17,387. Just to give context to members that we actually use the DBE learner numbers, and of course then use inflation and so forth to look at these numbers. But to say that the Minister, and as everybody knows, there are significant backlogs in education. We also know that there's a lot of vacant posts in terms of teachers. So the question is, will these increases or projected increases, adjust or change the situation for our current education system? Next slide, please. In this slide, it looks similar to the last one that members saw, but to really say the whole premise of the budget is that the VAT increase will be backed by increases in social grants. But actually, social grants are only increasing in real terms by 1.5%. But to also note that the child support and the grant in aid grants are actually only increasing in real terms by 1.3%. So the increases, as you can see, are lower than even the proposed VAT rate. But also to remind remind members that the SRD has been significantly eroded over time because it has not been adjusted continuously. And lastly, to highlight to members that even though we've expanded our social grant system since 1994, we need to look at the value of the grant itself, which hasn't significantly increased because continuously, as members will know, it's usually adjusted by about inflation, sometimes slightly below inflation, and then sometimes above inflation. So actually the value of the grants themselves, in nominal terms, look like they've increased significantly, but in terms of real terms, they haven't. Next slide, please. So here, as already mentioned, the premise of the budget is really about infrastructure. A big part of it is about how we're going to grow by building infrastructure, but to show members here that there's actually been declines or significant declines over time in infrastructure investment. So there you see general government economic infrastructure between 2015 and 2023 actually declined by 39.3%. So even though a lot of our policy documents emphasize on infrastructure as our way to grow, we are not seeing the same investments being made in real terms into the budget allocation. So for members to really look into that in terms of appropriations and our strategies. Next slide, please. So here, just again, we've already spoken about provincial equitable shares, so I won't go too much into that, but just basically say that we know that Gauteng gets the biggest proportion of the provincial equitable share, KwaZulu-Natal is second, and the Eastern Cape will receive 13%. Obviously, there's been discussions about why some provinces are getting higher or lower, increase or rather adjustments. Mapula's already mentioned this, so I'm not going to go into this, but to highlight that we are now seeing a higher annual average growth rate in the medium term compared to the 2024 MTPPS. So in the 2024 MTPPS, the growth rate was 3.9%, which would have been below inflation, but now it's 4.8%, so slightly below inflation. Next slide, please. And of course, as members know, the proportions, education, health are a big function of the provincial expenditure. And so to show just generally that proportions of total provincial spending per function, education is about 41.6%, health is about 34.1%. Of course, social development will be low because that is more of a national function. And so just to really highlight to members so that they can see for themselves the numbers here, what each province, or rather what the equitable share looks like for each province and how that is split. Next slide, please. I'll be handing over to my colleague.
Thank you very much. Good morning once again. I'm just going to take the committee through the municipal overview just to reflect basically the impact of the budget on the ground. I'll just deal with issues around municipal revenue and expenditure, specifically focusing on the current financial year, just to show members where the money goes. Next. On this slide, I will just highlight some of the issues that were raised in the SONA by the President. You could see that the government is aware of the challenges, main challenges affecting municipality. Now it's just a matter of ensuring that something is actually being done that is credible to address some of those challenges. Next slide, please. On this slide, we showcase municipal revenue for the current financial year, just to show where the money is currently gone. You would see that if you check some provinces, especially Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Western Cape as well as Eastern Cape, tend to get a lot of more revenue. You would understand that from the municipal point of view, according to MFMA, as well as municipalities always need to have revenue for whatever expenditure that they propose. So you would see that most of those are urban areas where the 8 metropolitans are. That's where in Gauteng they've got 3 metropolitans. That's why most of the budget is concentrated there. Then you will see that per municipal category, you will see that local government, local municipalities get about 35% of the revenue, so they don't have enough revenue raising capabilities. Operation revenue, most of it comes from service charges for water, for electricity, for waste management, and then property rates. Obviously, property rates is more areas that have got properties, that are sort of valued at a particular price. That's why they're able to pay such price. If you were to go to rural areas, you would find that they don't actually pay for that. So the revenue raising capabilities of those municipalities is always limited. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the expenditure. Once again, it's the same type of scenario where we see 68%, over 68% of spending concentrated in those areas, in those provinces as well as in those municipalities. This then suggests that economic growth and development efforts are highly urbanized. They're concentrated in those areas, and that this could lead to economic imbalances, where in rural municipalities are not that developed. Obviously, they can't compete. You would understand if an organization or company wants to invest, they would want, obviously, there's competition between the district and the municipality where best to invest. Any investor or anyone who wants to spend money, they would probably want to go to a place where they can have access to basic water and service and all those things. So you find that rural municipalities struggle with provision of those basic services. The roads are not up to standard. So then that exacerbates the economic conditions in those areas. Next slide, please. Again, this slide just shows where this money is being spent. You would see that most of this, employee-related costs, including payments of councillors, actually collectively account for about 162 billion. So more of the money also goes to that category. So the issue is then, how then do we get value from the money that the government is investing in the employees within the municipal area? Also, bulk purchases, like I've indicated, municipalities buy electricity for the purpose of resale. They spend about 143 billion, as well as for other initiatives. The issue of concern is that there's irrecoverable debt. This year, they plan to write off 3.6 billion of debt, which means that the credit control process is not up to standard. It means people are consuming the service, but they are not actually paying for it. Of particular concern is the issue around consultants. Municipalities collectively this year, they project to spend about 66.3 billion on consultants. Basically, consultants, they use them mainly for financial management to prepare financial statements. The AGs mentioned this on a number of occasions, that municipalities spend about 1.6 billion every year to help themselves. Remember, I've already alluded that we are paying compensation of employees, so we are paying for people to actually do the work, but most of the time you'll find that there's still use of consultants to do those very same issues that they're supposed to do themselves. Some of the consultants work as well. I'm still within time for 10:30, so don't worry. So most of the other work consultants is used within the infrastructure development, wherein they need to develop this infrastructure, so they don't have enough capacity within themselves, so they will need to go to get consultants to do that. Over and above that, they also use consultants for strategic planning, where they developed annual performance plans and all those type of things. Again, those are the things that themselves, if the government decided they are focused on building their own state capacity, they should focus on building that capacity themselves instead of maybe going as well as and spending more money on consultants. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes the capital budget expenditure for the current year. You would see that the largest share, over 51%, goes to water, wastewater, electricity, and all those type of things. That's where most of the work is concentrated. Economic and environmental services, for road transport. They're also investing some money there, as well as for housing, for fire stations, for human settlement, as my colleagues have already alluded. That's basically, this slide just shows where basically what type of infrastructure the municipalities are investing in. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the issues around conditional grants to municipalities, how they perform, and the allocations over the MTAF. Members can also go through that one as well. Next slide, please. So the other challenges over and above, like I've indicated, that the AGs themselves have indicated that over 50% of municipalities, they showed signs of financial distress. It means they're unable to manage their finances better. So there are issues around there. There's a huge amounts of unauthorized, wasteful, and fruitless expenditure that is reported every year. They've got weak financial controls, poor record keeping, like I indicated. They also there's a shortage of financial skills, like qualified CSE within the municipal environment, especially for the rural ones. Lack of consequence management. This is where if there was wrongdoing or alleged wrongdoing by municipalities, most of the time it's not investigated. When it's investigated, not critical or substantive action is taken to punish or to deter more other people from trying similar things. So that is one of the issues that keeps, or that sort of causes reoccurrence of those type of challenges that we have highlighted, as well as issues around infrastructure. I've already addressed that. Skills shortages. Next slide, please. On this slide, I just thought maybe I should just give members an update. We are, as the PBO, we are working on a paper on Section 139 interventions, just to see the impact thereof. We're still in the process of completing that paper. that paper shows a number of municipalities that are under Section 139 interventions and the challenges they are facing. Some of the challenges is that there's inconsistent implementation of these Section 139 interventions. There's issues around political interference, and some municipalities have been on Section 139 intervention for a prolonged period of time. So basically, 139 interventions are not producing the desired effect, and it's unclear whether they can actually contribute to better audit outcomes. Many fail because of issues of financial management. Some are under-resourced in intervention. You find that a municipality split under 139 intervention, they bring someone who doesn't actually have the enough capacity to be able to save that particular type of municipalities. And we also get resistance from municipal officials within the municipality itself where they don't cooperate and they destroy documents. We've seen that a lot reported even in the media. So there's a need to increase transparency and oversight through these Section 139 interventions. Next slide, please. As I conclude, these are some of the matters that may be for consideration, oversight consideration, that when Section 139 interventions is invoked, then there should be minimal interference from political interference. It should more focus on improving service delivery by establishing clear performance metrics and intervention, to develop targets for financial support, to invest in technical skills, to strengthen debt collection mechanism and reduce high write-offs and improve financial accountability, stricter cost controls, like I indicated, spending money on the right places. Some municipalities do get allocation, but they spend it on the wrong, on the wrong things, or on unstrategic areas wherein we don't see the value of that investment. So these are some of the challenges we thought we should just highlight to bring the impact of the budget on the matters that are happening actually in the ground, where people are actually feeling the impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Chair and members, I think the emphasis on our presentation really does remind members about the interplay. We wanted to remind members about the interplay between the fiscal framework and the division of revenue. So it's important that the allocation in the bill effectively translate into budget priorities into action, but also, when committee considers the bill and Chair mentioned the recommendations, it's important to ensure there's a clear alignment with the midterm development plans priorities, and that's also supported by robust sector plans, monitoring system clearly, which ensures that there's a clear drive towards realization of the BED, particularly look at the need to really address evolving socioeconomic realities, as we've highlighted in our presentation. The 2025 fiscal strategy is focused on the deficit and budget that must, in our view, be balanced with the need to address risks associated with social unrest, high level of unemployment, poverty and inequality. The division of revenue should be assessed not only as a proportion allocated to each spheres, but also on its potential impact on the service delivery, inequality reductions, and economic growth. So in our view, the committee should look at it within that context, not just as proportion allocations. Some of the key areas that we highlight, in particular also, again, I mentioned the interplay. We need to, when you look at this bill, there has to be a clear sense of how does the allocation itself really deal with the issues that are brought about by, when you think about the tax increases that we've seen coming in. How is that bill ensuring that it equalizes or it matches against? It's very important to take that into account. Ensuring that the efficient use of funds and addressing inefficiencies in a government spend is a crucial issue. Strengthening municipalities' financial management and accountability, and service delivery failures and financial distress in municipalities. So that consideration of the allocation be within that context. The need for oversight to ensure SOAs contribute to service delivery and economic development. Again, it's fall within that discussion that we think the bill should cover that. The committee never should further consider that the metro municipalities' dominance in municipal spending, while local government and district municipalities have a different setup. So how does that interplay in really ensuring regional economic imbalance, and how does this division of revenue really equalize in that? And it's very important in committee's consideration going forward. Overall, Chair and members, we do note the increases in the budget compared to the MTPS, quite a lot of increases there, colleagues have noted. But however, we do highlight the importance of recognizing that the proposed adjustments may not be fully to address the deep-seated challenges that we've seen, or the backlog, as the collective says. We do recommend that Standing Committee of Appropriations carefully consider these factors to ensure that the bill promotes equitable service delivery, addresses inequality, and supports sustainable development across spheres of government in line with the objectives of the 2025 SONA and the medium-term development. Thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity, and thanks to the team as well. Thank you so much, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I must say thank you for the extent of work that you've put into the presentation. I think it's substantive in nature and well researched, so I really welcome that and appreciate the work that the PBO has put in this regard. I'm going to allow members now, if we can then proceed in taking questions, comments from Honorable Waitlin. Honorable Mkhonto, Bateman, Galega, Mazmu. Okay, in that order, let's begin with Honorable Waitlin.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning to the colleagues. Thank you for the presentation. Let me give the compliments first, and then I'll speak to the matters that concerns me. You did a very good research on the local government. I can't say the same about province, and that's my concern, and I would like you to answer that. Why are you interrogating a local government to such an extent, but you're not speaking to province? I'm very concerned about that. In particular, let me go to slide 52, where you specifically focus on local government. My question is, where's the recommendations for provinces? I don't see it. Right, that's a start. So, Chair, the second matter is more academic of nature. It's around a reference, and hopefully I'll get your support in this, and that it is generally known by 2050 that most people will be moving to metro areas, about approximately 50%. So do you agree with that statement that we will see more and more money allocated to the metros as opposed to smaller towns and municipalities? If so, should we start preparing for that? Because we are seeing more and more people moving towards, and we see the crime and grime in metro areas. And the correlation with that against the current budget, and where should we aim at least by 2030. Then, attached to that, because I see you referred to the economic activity component of the PES formula, and it was not, there was periods that was not updated, so are you criticizing the Stats SA's information? If you do, can you please just explain that to me? What do you mean by that? And particularly the most regional GDP figures. So just give me that, and I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. I need to get a sense. What are you doing with the PES formula? Are you criticizing the current PES formula? If not, what is your point that you want to make with us with regards to the province's formulation? I don't see in your slides and presentation, and I spoke about this before, and I requested this before, Chair, that the duplication of service between province and local government, as well as the scope creep from province to local government, as well as the unfunded mandates of local government, the impact of that in the budget. We cannot present a budget and expect local government still to suffer, because there is unfunded mandates they are still sitting with. And we need to bring those figures forward and say, hold on, this is what is costing local government. We need to do an adjustment there. And please hear me, the duplication of services is even worse when it comes to particular health. And we saw with the clinics and some of the other areas. So if I can get a sense from your side, Dr. Jantjies, please. Can I just get a sense on slide 33, you're particularly focusing on only use of 50% allocation, over the use of that 50% allocation is done. Why are we not getting the rest of the votes? And maybe that figure, and what I'm concerned about is that figure of cost of employment. Can you just explain that? Because it's a 9%, and I don't understand Where does that come from? If you can just clarify that. I just want clarity, really, not criticizing, just clarifying what does this mean? Because, and it brings me to the second part of the question. Currently, the employment rate for local government, if I'm correct, and I'm happy for you to correct me, is around about 28 or 32%. What is it at provinces? Because you're not telling us. I would like to know what is the cost of employment at province level and the comparison to local government, because the pain that we see is what's happening at local government. I'm also missing, and I've said the same with the FFC, and I'm saying this to you as well, is that we need to start comparing the AG reports against the budget implementation that we're doing. And what I mean by that is that if you look at health, education, that we need to see what is the Auditor General are saying about these areas and these sectors, and why we should keep on continuing giving money when there's some Auditor General findings which is material. And I don't see those material findings as part of your recommendation here. We need to do things in context. We can't just talk to the budget as it stands, but also the impact that it had on the previous years. Because we keep on making the same mistakes. And the departments are not listening, and they're not concerned. So the accountability factor for me is a concern. And I need you to present that as part of your slides to say, these are the areas that is material findings that will have a direct impact in our budget. And what will that cost be? And I want the figure to see, if we fix this, this is what you can see as an impact from a particular, and the AG report is the fundamental source document I would use. Then section 139, I disagree, and I'd like maybe if you just can also clarify that, where you say that section 139 will reduce political interference, unless I read it's wrong. Let me tell you, section 139 does political interfere with local government. I don't agree with the fact that you say less political interference, but maybe I'm reading it wrong. You can explain that to me.
The point from the honourable member, can you just repeat that, sir?
Yeah, so in your slide of one of the recommendations around the section 139 and how you apply 139, is, and I need to get clarity to say that, does it mean you are saying that there will be less political interference or more? I'm saying to you, my position is that the moment you implement one section 139, there's more political interference. Yeah, so are we saying the same thing? So what you're saying is we shouldn't do section 139. You get what I'm getting at?
Honourable members, you can have a dialogue
Yes.
on this issue
Right.
when the PBO responds. But
Thank
I
you.
read the question you're putting to say, it says here, strengthen section 139 interventions by minimizing political interference and enhancing implementation.
If I can just explain that, what do they mean?
So maybe just put the question and then the
Yeah.
PBO can respond.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get an understanding. What do they mean by that? Yeah. Right. Then two more things, and the more to National Treasury, if I may, Chair. There's more saying, there's quite an interesting article I read the other day around the...
So Honourable Wakelin, I don't know if the team from the National Treasury are here to present or on a watching brief, so I'm a bit nervous
It's
to
just
put
one
a question.
question.
Yeah.
If they can't, it's fine. They can
That's
respond in writing later
That's fine.
if they don't mind. I just want to get a sense on something specifically. It's about this. It's called the SACU agreement, SACU agreement, and the loss to South Africa as a government is 73 billion rand, because we are the big brother. Do we see us keep on doing this? And what is your view on it? And I'm happy for you also to respond if you've got an academic answer for that, because it's more an academic question and what we need to do about it. Because being a big brother like the US, and I think that's what's happened there now, we're in a similar situation, that we had the loss of 73.5 billion. And then lastly, at slide 60, I don't see anybody speak to the slide, and particularly the National Empowerment Fund increase of almost 20 billion. Just your view on that, and why are we doing that, and what is the impact can we expect? Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Mkonto.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to you, Chair, honorable members, colleagues, Dr. Janchi and his team. Chair, I will have comments and questions. I hope Dr. Janchi and his team will be able to differentiate between the two. The first one, Chair, though I'm not comfortable, Chair, with the fact that we are having the FFC and the PPO not being confident in a Chapter 9 institution called States SA. I'm not comfortable with that fact. But then they say because the data, the census data has not been updated, they are giving us what they have used specifically in basic education and other sectors. But then when it comes to the poverty component, we are having indigenous data in municipalities. Has that been considered? Because municipalities do have indigenous lists of people that are living below poverty line and can't be able to pay for services. So did their analysis went to that extent? And then the comparison, Chair, between the urban and rural residents, I had it in passing, but the fact that people residing in rural areas, they have to bear travel costs before they get services. Any service that they get, they have to travel. It can be from the private sector, maybe banking, or to home affairs, or to any public and private service that they have to get, they have to travel. So I didn't hear the emphasis analysis of that. And then the decline in infrastructure development, where are we placing it, Chair? Is it at national, is it at provincial, or is it at a local level? Because there are a lot of promises of infrastructure development that has been presented during SONAS, during SOPAS, during SOMAS, but at all levels, they seem not to be achieved. And then I will also go to the Section 139, Chair. The Section 139, I agree with the presentation that it opens for even bigger political interference. But then in the recommendations, what can be done? The people that are sent there, maybe it's a team, depending whether it's Section 39 1A or 1B or 1C, the team that is being sent to those municipalities, are there any prescripts of minimum requirements, like maybe qualifications or experience, even their track record of those people is very important. Chair, in the presentation, our general understanding or our general consideration as government is that there must be basic service delivery. there is a rural municipality, there is an urban municipality. But the fact of the matter is that there are municipalities where you will find one household here and another household 10 kilometers away from the other. Are those analyses being considered when we talk about these budget allocations and the analysis of the expenditure of these municipalities? Because they seem to be left behind, because seemingly it's impossible or very difficult for those municipalities to cater for such communities under their jurisdiction. Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Member, Honourable Bateman.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Good morning to my honourable colleagues and to Dr. Yankis and your team. And thank you for a helpful presentation, informative presentation. And I think you highlighted very well many of the pressures that our provinces and municipalities are feeling in terms of their ability to deliver services, and improving frontline service delivery is obviously critical. Addressing poverty, unemployment, inequality, those are things that you've highlighted, and wholeheartedly endorse the need to address these things. And I think for me, again, you're going to find me a little bit like a stuck record on this, I'm afraid, for a while. But the key question for me is actually how we deliver the economic growth, because that's going to obviously be the thing that causes the job creation and also the increase in the tax revenues. So it's great to identify and analyze the fact that we don't have enough money to do what we want to do, but the question is, where do we get that money from? Where do we get that revenue from? And so we're not going to make real progress in improving people's lives or the government service delivery unless we can actually get those growth things. And I think if we focused on that as the key thing, we'll also realize that if the cost of the delivery of our services is economic stagnation and unemployment, then it's actually a price too high to pay. And I think that the problem is that is the price that we are paying and have been paying. And I think one of the reasons is that there's a fatal flaw, if you like, or there's a couple of assumptions that we're having that are actually wrong in terms of like our analysis of what's causing economic growth. And I'm going to pick up on these, not because this is the central theme of the presentation, but just because I think it's so important to the nation. And it also underlies my comments the other day, which I apologize were a little harsh. But it's only because bad ideas have consequences, and those consequences can be very severe. And I think, and I'm not going to be apologetic about addressing what I think are the bad ideas. And I say that I see them in two areas where these assumptions are lying in these slides. And the first one is on page 12, and it's also repeated in the summary, where it says the scale of the proposed budget adjustments for several function groups may be insufficient to address backlogs that have constrained the public sector. Agreed. Weakened the resilience of households. I'm changing the order. Agreed. Suppressed economic growth. Don't agree. And I think there's an assumption here that we can spend our way into economic growth. And again, we also see the assumption coming through on page 18, where it says, since austerity began in 2012, unemployment increased, ... And again, I mean, it's loaded with, and I know I've been accused of dragging the PBO into politics, but the problem is that actually the theories and the ideas are actually, they are political, really. And the PBO is providing the academic justification for some of the policies, the failed government policies of the past. And so I'm not trying to make this personal, but I'm saying unless we actually confront the ideas that have caused the problems that have got us here, we're going to see a repeat of the problem. And I see in these two slides these, I think, very pernicious ideas that are prevalent here. So, and I think, you know, we speak about austerity. I mean, austerity is really when you realize, actually, yikes, we don't have enough money to do all the things we want to do. We need to have, I mean, a more positive way of calling it would just be saying financial discipline or addressing inefficiency. And the FFC was with us the other day, and they made the point that we've never actually experienced a period of fiscal consolidation. We've actually seen, this is not the FFC, but one of our own internal observers commented on the fact that the real size of the government now is 3 times what it was in Nelson Mandela's day and twice what it was in Thabo Mbeki's day. So we've seen a growth in the tax to GDP ratio, and even in the current budget, we're still seeing a growth in the tax to GDP ratio. And so, again, I mean, the key driver for economic growth and employment, if you step back, is direct private sector investment, and that remains very low. And at risk of repeating myself from the other day, the reason is that we're not competitive. We're not an attractive place to invest. The world competes for capital investment. And that capital investment drives the economic growth, it drives the economies. And we have to be an attractive place to invest capital if we want to be seeing the economic growth and development. And also, we also have to see how we can boost the profitability and the savings of South Africa. It's not about just international capital. It's about the reinvestment of the profits that are generated by South African companies. We can't at the same time be very resentful of companies making profits and, oh, look at these big profits they're making, and at the same time saying, we want more economic growth. No, the two go together. You've got to make the profit to be able to invest it, to be able to grow. You've got to be able to save money in order to be able to put it in the bank, to bring down the cost of capital, to make the overall economy more attractive, and to speed up the rate of direct private sector investment and basically building the capital base of the nation. And some of the things that we have to look at if we start to think about that are tax rates, ease of doing business, government overspending. Why is government overspending a problem? Because it undermines the confidence that investors have in the country. If it seems like the government has got no grasp on what actually drives economic growth, then international investors will say, well, they're just racking up debt recklessly. Someone's going to have to pay for that sometime. The future doesn't look good. The currency doesn't look good. Default is on the edge, you know. And as I said, we're teetering. We don't have margin of error here. Already our interest bill is very high. If we get downgraded further and further in terms of ratings agencies, anyway, I won't belabor the point, but I mean you know the point. So you know, educational outcomes. We talk about wanting to address inequality, but the reality is, it's going to depend on how effective our education system is, because at the end of the day, that's actually going to determine one of the main determinants of earnings capacity, and that's the route and the escape route out of poverty is education. Labour laws, BBBE, these have. I mean, we might not like to say it, but I mean, I'm not going to be apologetic about it. These things have had an effect on the willingness of people to invest and to employ people in South Africa, and then corruption, lack of accountability, failing infrastructure. And the breakdown of trust and confidence in government. And I'll add another point, which is policy uncertainty as well. So I think, again, it's a long story, but I do think that the PBO is the problem here, is part of the problem here, because if your economic presentations are reinforcing this message that somehow it's a lack of government spending that's inhibiting economic growth, then I think they're actually part of the problem, not part of the solution. That our solution lies in a more efficient government, and it's necessary for us to be efficient. Why? Because then we can make our economy more competitive for investment. And if we can make our economy more competitive for investment, we can speed up economic growth and job creation. And then the government revenues will grow more quickly and we'll have more money anyway. So it's not even like we're going to end up with less money. But if we focus all the time on these are the needs, where can we find the money? And if that's our emphasis, and we also think that somehow that's going to boost economic growth, we are seriously deluded. And that's how we got into this problem. And the way to get out of it is to address the wrong thinking first. And that's why I said the PBO is a vestigial organ of a previous administration, because you were an organ that propped up a way of doing the government. But now, hopefully, with the GNU, that's changing. But it's vestigial, because if it's going to continue to try and put out the same economic policy, it's actually no longer serving a purpose that's helpful. And I'm not talking about everything the PBO does, but I'm talking about these specific things, just to make it very precise. Okay, because 100% agree with like 90% of what's in the presentation, but I'm just picking up on those things that I feel are fatal flaws, and where your contribution to the government and to South Africa is negative. And I also think that there is a duty of care and responsibility that rests upon us, all of us, and particularly on those who are in positions of trust to be advisors to government. And if what I'm saying is not correct, then go and have a whole panel of economics professors, and let's have it all out amongst all the economics professors and challenge what I'm saying and come back. But we don't have space for pet theories here. This is the South African future that's at stake. And this is not a place for people to be pushing their pet theories about what's going to cause economic growth, myself included. So I'm happy to be held accountable for what I've said, and if I'm wrong, I will gladly retract.
Honorable Bateman, I don't want to belabor this particular point, but I'm careful not to swim into the traverses of what is historic and what is not in terms of historical practice of the PBO. I want to request, because you've made the statement in two different forums, perhaps in different ways, can I request that we narrow our input in what is happening in the 7th administration? I don't deny that some of what we are dealing with may have some history, but to impute that on an organization, I don't think can hold, simply because, as I said to you before, as I sit on the board of the PBO, that is not my experience. We can debate the ideas, I don't deny that, but I'm careful not to link the ideas as I wrote notes here as a historical legacy that comes from the 6th administration. I'm cautious not to swim in those waters, and I want to urge you, honourable member. I think before we've had this same conversation, I don't want to repeat it. I think it's unfair, and I don't necessarily believe that it is appropriate. I think let's narrow our conversation to what we are dealing with here in the presentation that is there, and make the comment in that regard. So if I can ask that, because it becomes unfair, because what eventually happens is that you are going to get into a backwards and forwards with where the PBO sits. They have to defend themselves, and I think it's not helpful for the committee's own work.
Fair enough, Chair. I accept that's helpful feedback and take that on board, and to the extent that my comments are unhelpful and drag us into a historical debate, I retract. But if we could just deal with the matters at hand. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on, because that was sort of the main thing, but there were a few smaller things that I just wanted to pick up. So on page 20, I think very helpfully highlighted the growing ratios of civil servants to population and the static number of police members as an example of that, but I know it's across the civil service. And the key problem here is that our unit costs have been rising more quickly than inflation, and the key and obviously population growth is a factor as well. But one of the key issues to focus it in is the public wage bill, and the fact that we have these minimum across the board wage increases that apply to civil servants, even if they're already potentially overpaid. And then there's also increases, and things tend to ratchet up. And then when one does try to bring the costs down, it's always hard to address people-related issues. I mean, it's a gut-wrenching thing to actually have to say to someone, look, we can't afford you on this payroll anymore. Obviously, it's not it is for most managers, it's kind of a last resort. And so if you're managing something, often other things get sacrificed before that does. But a little bit off the point here, what I'm trying to say is there's a systemic weakness here, and we're going to be fighting an uphill battle, trying to deliver services cost effectively if we can't address the systemic weakness and of effectively overpaid civil servants who still get increases year after year after year, and this arm wrestle between the unions and government around this. And I just wanted to know if the PBO could do some work on this, or if you've got any recommendations on it. Like, as an organisation committed to the health of the fiscus, how can we solve this problem? I'm looking to you and saying, help us structurally, help us legally. Like, what are the legal things that need to change? What are the processes that need to change? Do we have to have the public wage sector maybe a two-tier approach, or maybe some exceptions where the increase is not applied? Or do we have to have it subject to Parliament's approval so that the Finance Minister can't make the call, et cetera, et cetera? So that's the next one. Page 22, talking about university education, make the obvious observation that there's no point creating places for university education if our graduates are not able to find work. And so, to what extent are graduates successful in finding work? And can we break this down according to the qualifications that we're funding? And are we actively scaling back programs that are delivering degrees that don't lead to employment in order to refocus those resources on programs which deliver the skills and the qualifications which are in demand in the marketplace? Are we aware of that? I thought those were questions that were raised from the slides that were presented. And then just lastly, as a general comment, I think the PBO could add a great deal of value to the budgeting process if it delivered implementable plans and recommendations for governments to be able to run more efficiently. And the inefficiencies take various forms. I mentioned the wage increase process. There's just the number of departments, programs, and sub-programs. Can they be consolidated? Are some needing to be brought to an end? We have far too many public entities, about 700, I believe. Each one's got its own governance, its own administration structure. Implementable recommendations to address inefficient, procurement as well, another area, huge area of inefficiency. I would really see the PBO as being able to fulfill an amazing function if it could help us as government to sharpen our pencil and do what we need to do for the least cost. Because all of that's going to mean, one, we can do more, and two, we can also make our economy more streamlined, more efficient, and as a result, reduce taxes as one of a number of measures to accelerate economic investment, economic growth, and job creation. And the PBO can play an important role in that. You're well placed to do that. I would love to see more of that, and I'm going to come back to that with the point at the end of the agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Honorable Kalagamazu.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, let me echo the sentiments of my colleagues in appreciating the presentation and the analysis presented before us by the PBO. Chair, I am partly covered by, I think, Honorable Mkondo and on some of the issues I had noted. However, Chair, my anxiety is on the continuous analysis in terms of inequality. Yes. Why am I anxious? Because the priorities of the 7th administration, of which it has been the priorities of the previous administrations, is to narrow the gap of inequality, is to deal with issues of unemployment and poverty. So the PIU. And the gap continues to widen. My question to PPO is, do you think this budget will assist in narrowing the gap? Because it doesn't help, we continuously talk about inequality and being the highest in the ranking. However, the budget is not assisting. If not, what is it that can be done to make sure that at least the budget makes a dent in terms of narrowing the gap of inequality and assisting us, and also to grow the economy. You know, because economic growth has been quite a problem. Well, external factors, maybe we might have limited strength to deal with those factors, but internally, what is it that we can do just to get a bit of economic growth? So what would you advise in terms of this current budget? My other point, Chair, is on the issue of the data, the data collection in population. I mean, the population data at schools, as the presentation alluded to. How accurate is this data? And how current is the data? Why I'm asking this question, PPO, Mr. Janji, is because in January, I was part of the team that was doing school visits. We went to schools. And at schools, there are undocumented children there. The Home Affairs system does not talk to the system at education. They are undocumented in terms of Home Affairs, but they have to be accommodated at schools. So does this analysis include those kids? And if not, what is it that can be done? What should government do? Also, the research is, I don't get a sense of, in terms of the people who are hungry, impoverished. Maybe I missed that part. In all the analysis you have given us, I didn't see the analysis that says we have this percentage of hungry people, people who sleep without food, and in which provinces are they, I mean, do they dominate? Where is the dominance of people who sleep without food? Is it in the rural areas, in the urban areas? Which provinces are, as we talk about equitable share, so where are those people who are hungry? And Chair, I note the issue of the struggling of the rural areas. How can the DORA assist those, the distribution of revenue, assist those municipalities? Because if they remain in this status where they are, it means the in-migration or urbanization will continue to happen. And when they arrive at the urban areas, they still don't get a job. I think I said this even yesterday. They settle in the informal settlements. They use services in the metros, and yet they are unable to pay for those services, which then brings me to the question of revenue collection ability of the metros. To say, I think the analysis still, you know, it still talks to the old metros when people were employed, when the townships were paying for services. So the analysis is still there. It has not moved to the current situation where there's a lot of urbanization and people are unemployed, and even those people who used to work and pay the services, they are no longer paying. So, yeah, so those are my concerns and the questions that I had noted. And then my other questions have already been asked by colleagues. I don't want to repeat, Chair. Thank you.
I think those were all the members who'd indicated questions in this regard. I mean, I wanted to raise just a few points. On the first is maybe a request that I would like to get concurrence from members of the committee of, which is a request for some of the expenditure adjustment proposals that the PBO can put forward for efficiency. Because you've done and this was a request made by Honorable Bateman, who's not in the room, but I wanted to formally put that to the PBO, simply because it would be then in line with the Money Bills Act and it would be in line with the prioritization that speaks to how we deal with allocations towards service delivery, which is what the law prescribes. So if I can put that formally to the PBO, that'd be helpful, Dr. Jantjies, as just recommendations. Because when I look at, I want to sum up what I think you said, what was said, and perhaps think about, because I have to think about it in the context of what we recommend. And part of, without putting words in your mouth, but there's a lot of work done here on a broad principle that says we reject the VAT hike. Right?
I don't know if we've got a...
You don't have the mandate to say that, I might, yeah. But you've already said that the Treasury's comparisons relative to other countries means that South Africans are going to suffer from higher regressive penalties on the basis of a VAT hike. I mean, I can't deduce anything other than from even some of those statements. Just the deduction on my part would be to say, no, actually, let's increase VAT even more from the proposed 0.5%. So I think I'm not trying to play around with English. I'm just trying to be clear what the subtleties are for my benefit. The other issue is on the cost of employees question. The population of civil servants is similar, hasn't grown in head counts in the last 10 years. The translation happens to be in the second managerial, and off we go when you get bracket creep of employees moving up from a salary band point of view. Now, we are naturally not set up for the job of intersecting wage negotiations, but Treasury pegged the increases to be 4.7%, I think the last, at least in the projected, in the medium-term budget policy statement, and then it landed at 5.5% on a multi-year deal. Now that has a quantum expenditure to it, which I'd like to see whether could the PBO help us with that, because at this point in time, the recommendations we are going to make as a committee will have to come down to rands and cents, and part of it is that if you then accept a 0.5% increase as a revenue increasing model, you must concede it's about a 16 billion rands or somewhere there. That could quite easily be, it's not offset, but it is compared to the increase in the NEF funding, for example, of 20, I'll come to the NEF in a moment, but there are other expenditure items that have seen that increase that could potentially be a conversation about trade-offs, which I think, to me, part of what frustrates me about the budget, not what you have said, is that actually the South African government simply refuses to make trade-offs, a bit like an alcoholic with a credit card. You can increase the limits all you like, they're not going to stop drinking. Sorry? No, I would like, let me come to the NEF conversation, because you've cited it in one of the slides here. I don't understand the quantum calculation of job increases. The statement you make here is that, you know, it's 2.7 billion. The entity also shows increased expenditure on supporting job opportunities from 1.5 billion, which is 10,500 jobs in 2024-2025, then 1.5 billion, 77,000 jobs in 2025-2026, then 20 billion, 140,000 jobs. How do you work the calculus from what the job outputs look like? I can't quite understand that. That's my own naivety. You can help me. I want to know where the PBO's recommendations are on the formulas. What I mean by that is, if there was a public hearing on equitable share formulas, what would be, particularly the provincial ones, what would be your submission in terms of how they can be improved better? because I think we've made a recommendation in the previous term that you've got to accelerate the review of the equitable share formula. Yet I sit here today, Treasury reckons they've began some work. I'm not sure. So I'd like to hear your recommendations as a PBO, because I think it will help us as a committee. I want to wrap the conversation up. When I look at the budget, effectively there are three big spending items. You've attended to the one as you said there's no such thing as a social wage. The whole thing is a social wage. At least the government pretends it's 60% of its expenditure framework, right? Somewhere there. But the second is cost of employees. And I think I've made my own views on what the medium-term increases look like and what their impact is going to be on the budget. I would like for perhaps maybe if you can give some commentary on some of the debt management strategies, because that is the third biggest block in the budget. It's 22 cents of the budget, 22% at least. So in the light of that, we can have an ideological debate about what is the acceptable level or not, and whether countries can afford increased borrowing if that borrowing is allocated towards productive infrastructure spend or productive growth spend. We can have an ideological debate on that issue. That's not what I'm trying to swim into. What I am very conscious of, though, is our ability to service that debt as a function of crowding out other expenditure items. Because I think Treasury, for all the right or wrongs, they've done some good work on FATF. I think we're starting to get through some ratings, et cetera, et cetera. So those wheels are turning. But the harsh reality is that our debt to GDP is expected to peak at 76%, but IMF projects it at 80%. I personally am convinced we will not peak at 76% to GDP. We will peak higher than that, which means that the crowd out effect of debt servicing costs will increase relative in the medium term. So I'm trying to understand from your perspective, are there other debt management strategies that we need to begin to think of, other than the magic one that says growth? If you grow, you can grow your way through debt management, is the principal argument that I hear from Treasury. But the last one is a little bit of a tricky one, because it speaks broadly to the AG's report about, I mean, audit opinions give me one sense, but audit opinions don't always tell me whether work is in fact being done or not. So I don't discount them like I don't discount the AG, but I want to understand areas of slippages, areas of leakages, but also the total cost of corruption. I don't actually think we talk about it enough in terms of other inflationary burdens. We can use, if government spend, this is the famous, on property leasing, that property government spends 45% higher than anyone else on leasing of government property, that has its own cost to it. Now, what I want to understand is some of it, of course, is just pure incompetence, as President Mbeki once says that often incompetence precedes corruption. But some of it is just blatant corruption. So I want to understand what, if the PBO has some sense of what the costing of that is, because I think it's going to be important when we begin to attend to some of the, because when GTAC was here and did its own spending reviews, it became common cause that there's a obstinate article from the attitude in some of the state items to say, we're going to keep following this train of thought, even though it is clear it isn't delivering what it needs to, and even though it's clear that some of the issues at core really are about corruption in and of itself. And we can't discount the cost of state capture when we talk about increases today. because that's what state-owned enterprises have been victims of. And now you take ESCOM as an example, our debt servicing cost as a function of where ESCOM's component of that debt is cannot be ignored. It sits here. So I want to, so if I can ask, and what I did say to members of the committee, I think we need to have an engagement with NEF, we need to have an engagement with the Ministry of Transport, because they have seen disproportionate increases in their budget votes. And we'd like to understand from a probity point of view and a performance point of view what those items are bound to deliver. We did have an engagement with Transport last year that gave us a sense of where their expenditure lines go, but they've seen profound increase in some of the signaling items going into this budget. What are the exact plans? Because you can allocate money to infrastructure spend, but you can have a municipality that's incompetent, and then you are literally throwing money after bad. That either will be returned back to you at the end of that financial year, or it will be money that will be misspent on wasteful expenditure because municipalities just don't have the capability behind it. So I want to understand your views on just some of that, because what I'm trying to really allude to is to make sure that when we make recommendations, we're not just giving commentary on the budget, but actually are intentional about where some of the cuts can come from, or what some of the adjustments can come from. I use the word cut, but there could very well be items that need to be increased, as you've raised the fact that the teacher-learner ratio relative to other countries is low, and you know, my pet peeve is education, so I could sing that song, but I'm glad you've given me some ammunition to hum that hymn even more. But it might be true also in healthcare, as you've indicated, etc., etc. I mean, you know, I have my views on the size of the cabinet, but I do think some of that money could be best spent capacitating SARS than driving deputy ministers around. That's just a statement in parting. Let me allow you to respond.
No, thank you so much, Chairperson, members, for the questions. Very punchy questions, very important. Look, I think we're here to, let me really emphasize, our role is to support you as a committee, as members of parliament, as the House of Parliament. That's really what I want to start with. And you know, we do take feedback from members, and we reflect on that. And also, you know, it's useful to get the feedback so that we can reflect and add and so on in the next presentation. But also importantly is that in our workflow, Chair, we do create space for members of parliament committees to really send us the areas they want us to focus on. I want to emphasize that. And for me, it's important to always remind members of parliament committees that we do work on your behalf. If you have an area you want us to do the work on, send us the request. We'll let you know we can do it, how long, and so on. Of course, I'm quite careful here because of capacity issues, but please feel free to send us the issue, Chairperson and members, which we would love to support. We really work within the context of the National Development Plan, which says, you know, any policy proposal should be backed by evidence-based, because even government propose measures for budgets, in our view, that should be backed by evidence. And that's what we try to do a lot of times in our work, to really not even, you know, I'm going to be very quite careful how I put the statement, not even being involved in ideological debates or what have you. It's not a view to present this data that says this is how the public finance, this is how economy is running, and these are the issues. So, and we welcome members' consideration, and which includes, of course, the criticism. So I feel I should have started that. But I think what we also do, Chair and members, we also encourages the committee to also ask the same question. When the Minister of Finance present proposals on that, on what have you, our view approach to say, we need to then ask them to say, what is the likely impact of this on growth and so on. So we also want that. And I think when we give critical analysis about those, is also to remember that Parliament has the ultimate say on what happens. And just in a quick, nice way, in a very abstract sense, we can't say, we can't say we don't agree with that or any increases. But I think what we're trying to emphasize is for this committee, particularly being a spending committee, to really ensures that the net effect of increasing taxes, it's positive as opposed to negative, because you can raise revenue and spend that money within the areas that support households and so on. So that's really what we're trying to say, because we haven't modeled specifically the VAT as it is. So when you consider, hence I was mentioning the interplay between the fiscal framework, and it's very important to really ensure that interplay fits well, because the other one influences the other, the other one gives direction to the other one. The point around the provinces and the local government, it's a very important point, because there probably have to be a policy debate around that, whether, how to ensure, because when you look at Section 139, municipalities, the geographical areas of those municipalities are largely within remote municipalities, which in a way can say, start to say, maybe there's no capacity within those remote areas, remote municipalities. I looked at one province, I think it was Northwest or whatever, where all of those municipalities are in rural areas. A lot of it is, we spoke about the issue of capacity, but I think the bigger question, again, I sense the policy debate question is the opportunity to really merge this, have limited components, have maybe limited municipalities or limited province, where you merge in a more of ensuring strategically, and that will probably deal with efficiency issues as well, to say, if you have a municipality that is underperforming or in an area that it never raise revenue, how do you make sure that it fits well with the district municipalities and become one municipality or a province, whatever. It's a policy discussion that I feel we can't run away from it if we're going to debate the efficiency and also the effectiveness of service delivery. Because where we're saying, Chair and members, that at where we are, it's a lot unsustainable. Service is not delivered a lot. You have so much various layers of oversight, of monitoring. We have provinces, district, and so much. And how do we really take opportunity to deal with that? Again, it's a policy issue. In my view, when you look at a lot of countries, there are countries that have a 3-tier system. There are countries that have 2-tier system, where there's only central and regional government. And maybe we need to have the comparison to say which one is more effective. But so far, there's quite less actual countries globally that has 3 tiers. We're one of the few countries that have 3 tiers. And we need to make sure that how effective that is. And also that also talks to the issue of link it back to cost of employment, because it's also coming out as a bigger issue. And I heard a lot of members raising the issue of cost of employees. Again, it's an issue of how do we get value from that spending? Because at the end of the day, we will do a review if the committee asks us to do the review or to advise what could be measures the committee can recommend in dealing with the cost of employees. But I think in the meantime, what we have said, I think also FCC said over the years before, is the real wage bill is the value or the productivity. Are we getting productive? Is it productive? If you're saying spending 20-30%, whatever you're spending, how can you measure whether we're getting value from that? It also becomes important for allocating the budget to say, we are spending 20%, are we getting the value of that 20%? That could be one of the area where we recommend to say, we need to start having mechanism as Parliament, as government, to say, whatever we're spending on the cost of employees, we are getting, or how do we measure productivity of it? Because that's probably a difficult measure, but an easy way as a policy mechanism. But we can do a more thorough review subject to committee recommending. But I think the issue of productivity, how productive is that, or value, are we getting value for that money? Which I sense also that was members are trying to ask. We could look into that. The question around stats SA, I'll jump in, I'll leave the committee to comment on those issues. The questions around stats SA, as PBO chair members, we rely so heavily on stats SA data. So I want to equivocally say to members, we have full confidence because we rely on the data fully. So we can't not have, you can't rely on it and then come and advise you on that, and we say, we question the date. So I think what we're trying to emphasize is to say there's a formula that proposes how the allocation is done. As part of the question of saying how do we look at the provinces, so we need to make sure there's updated data, up-to-date data that informs the formula. I think that's the emphasis there. And you know, one of the, I mean, Stacey is not here to raise the point, but I think one of the points we've raised in the previous year was a concerns around what I would call defunding the State SA, or not providing enough resources to ensure State SA do its work properly. As much as Parliament has to hold State SA accountable, but one of the concerns raised before is that Parliament has to also ensure that it has enough resources to deliver on this mandate. But I know there's still debate around the 2022 census, but I think what we're factually saying here is that the data is not up to date. Colleague will emphasize on that. But I wanted to start with that point as well, to say we rely heavily on the data from the State SA. When we talk about situation analysis, that really comes from the State SA, and we plead with this committee to ensure that the SA can deliver on its mandate. The point of the I think I touched on section 139's, the issue of, when we look at, there's a paper that was written by one of the colleagues who were doing this section 139 involved another time. They certainly, naturally, when you bring people from outside an institution, there's always going to be a pushback, you know, and that comes quite a lot, because at the end of the day, you find that people come in and there's a correct, someone said the issue of skills. There's evidence that some of the people who are brought in are not necessarily equipped to deal with the section 24. There's a paper that I'll share with the committee about it. But I think the issue of ensuring sustainability post becomes important, because a lot of it is also politically interference or politically involvement, and you know, there's that mixture of issues that we're finding in our analysis, that mixed bag of that. There's issue of political interference, but issues of capacity of the people who are sent to do the work themselves. You find that, I mean, one of the gentlemen was saying to me, for you to be given the role to be an administrator, you must have been a municipal manager before, or must have been an accounting officer before. And you don't see a lot of that in some of the Section 39, people who lead the process. And that, again, it points back to a point of how do we hold those government or those entities or those individuals accountable as well in dealing with Section 120. But we'll have a more detailed report we'll share with the committee about what we found out under Section 129. Because, I mean, all these things are interlinked, chair members, because, and I link it back to the issue of lack of growth. I think what the slide 12 we're also trying to show is that over a long period of time, there's a very clear evidence that shows that we have not, and say we, I'm saying government and state entities have not invested in infrastructure and maintenance as well. You know, there's a very clear evidence that shows that from a certain period of time, we've underinvested in these areas that other social infrastructure and others are economic infrastructure. So I think our debate just there is to say, if we agree that investment will lead to more economic activities or lead to more employment and so on, then that evidence that shows there hasn't been could also say that, could also mean that by underinvesting, we've impacted the demand in that area. So we see there's minus 49, minus 19, minus 39. That's underinvestment over a long period of time. And that, without even going deeper into it, and looking at the formula of economic growth in textbook economics, it does show the importance of gross physical capital formation in leading to economic growth. So I think what we're trying to emphasize is really around to say, you know, if we balance the issues that lead to growth with understanding of what we do in efficiency. Very importantly, we do bang on a lot of efficiency, Chair, on the need for review for the efficiencies. And again, we're happy to do the work on that. But I think we have highlighted that there's a need for ensuring the efficiency in spending, and we can do more work. But there's a very straightforward analysis from even budget from National Treasury data shows that we have underinvested. SOEs and government in three spheres we have underinvested, and that in a way will definitely impact the level of growth. And what we're saying is that let's fix the infrastructure. Well, at least one of the area. Let's fix infrastructure. Let's reverse the area of investing. If we agree that investment will lead to more employment and more growth, which there's a very widely written literature around that evidence that shows that there is a direct link with that, with the investment and productive investment. To clear, hence I'm saying social and economic infrastructure in that regard. Let me stop there. I don't want to see if the other issues. I'll come back quickly. Or the issue of the duplication in unfunded mandate. Definitely, the Money Bills Act does require the looking at the unfunded mandate. It's important things we require to report on that as well. What are unfunded mandate? Because obviously some of the functions are concurrent functions. When you look at the constitutional function, that's why that slide was important, Nelly, that you showed about the different functions of different spheres, and that naturally leads to concurrent functions. And in our view, government should, the Minister of Finance should report on that in presenting the budget speech in particular, to say these are the concurrent, these are unfunded mandate, or this will lead to unfunded mandate. We've not done a detailed analysis around that, but it's something that together with FFC we could also look into that. But there is a need to report on that, and we will be happy to look into it as one of the projects going forward. But I think more importantly is just to have a clear request from these are the projects that you want us to look at, and some that we can look into it. But also emphasize the issue of capacity. We have very limited capacity. That's why sometimes take long to finish projects, but we do put them in a pipeline as well. So yes, there is a naturally created concurrent functions in terms of the Constitution. The issues that we've not looked at unintended consequences will lead to unfunded money. I mean, on nationally pronounced policies and how it impacts the provinces and the local government. That requires quite deeper diving into it and really reflecting and provide clear evidence on that. I'm saying from abstract perspective, there is evidence for that. The issue of the provinces, and a deep analysis on the province, it is my wish that we should do that. Actually, yesterday I had a meeting with the House Chairperson and at Yonsupi to say, we need to really decompose what is happening in the health, education, and really quite dive deeper into those activities, largely trying to understand why are the outcomes not being impacted. And I think the FFC and PBO, they could be in a good space to really go deeper into that. And hopefully in the next few years, we'll start focusing on. But we've done some work around conditional grants specifically, which deals with the provinces and what are some of the blockages and challenges that you have within that can still provide an early indication on what is happening in the provinces. I think there's always limited time on space to how much we should put in a presentation. So some of this data is already put out there, so we can subsequently send that information back. And lastly on the SACU, I don't know, SACU is a policy issue. I don't want to say it's a political issue. It's a policy issue, which we would want to know specifically what would the committee want us to say around that. But there's obviously, it's more of a policy issue which government has taken a decision to say because of the way South Africa's makeup and other countries surrounding us, there could be an area where they're losing out revenue and we need to probably compensate. But I don't want to get deeper into it, but we would want to get specifically what you want us to say to you or look into that for you, Chair and members of the committee. We are happy to do spending reviews, and we'll definitely look into that. The issue of the rural versus urban municipalities or areas, it's important to think about it in the budget, and hence we try to stress out the implications of the situation analysis where we go deeper. But the Minister of Higher Education had promised over the years to provide skills master file, which really set out what level of skills the economy requires and how that informs the skills we get from the tertiary and the universities and so on. So I think that would be one area to look into as a committee when you think about how much investment you need to make into tertiary education to say, rightfully so, are we making investment in a way that we can create? But I feel my sense that this skills master file very crucial to direct the investment into the sector. So I would recommend that maybe that should be the Minister of Higher Education. Minister of Education should also, I know it's been divided now, should come into the committee and provide that skills master file, and whether that informs the allocation within the sector itself in that regard. Chair, let me give the team to come in quickly. The different areas colleagues can just comment on, but let us just maintain within responding to the questions broadly. Thank you so much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't have many to respond to, but when we planned for this presentation, members, we really struggled to figure out how much of each sphere we're going to include in this presentation. We also listened to the questions that you asked to Treasury, and we really tried to provide you with a bit of more information on national, a bit of more on provinces, but we can't put everything in these slides in terms of the expenditure of provinces, because we also have the quarterly fiscal brief that we sent out that's got a lot of detailed information in terms of provinces, specifically in terms of compensation and how they spent the funding. And the director also just responded to, because the provincial government get a lot of, the biggest proportion of their spending is on education and health, and they are mostly funded through the equitable share, which funds basically the compensation, and then the conditional grants, which is education and health. And on an annual basis, we do an update on the performance of those conditional grants. And because I'm a policy analyst, I'm very much into performance. And in those analysis that we do, we include expenditure as well as performance information to try and get a sense of efficiency. It's not a one-on-one, you can't just divide it, but we try and provide a type of efficiency analysis in the conditional grant reports. And then in terms of the compensation of employees, every year we really look at the detailed information on the information that we get on a national level on compensation of employees. And most of the times, the numbers does not make sense. So we cannot truly base all our analysis on the information in this book, on page XXB11. You will see if you look at the average growth, in some instances the average growth of the number of employees increased by 5.2%, but the increase in the cost is only 4.7%. I don't think that makes sense if your numbers increase more than the increase in what you spend on COE. In other instances, for example, there's a decrease in the number of employees, but the expenditure on the cost increased by 6.9%. That also doesn't make sense to me. The same with water and sanitation. The numbers decreased by 3.2, but the cost increased by 7.3. So, I mean, if we really want to do analysis and be certain of what we're analyzing, the data specifically on employees must be proper information, and we must trust the information. Also, in terms of the COE and the personnel, we've got 411,000 positions, but we also have positions outside of the funded positions. That's also an issue. Where are they? What are they doing? Why are they? Are they consultants that are hired in addition to the structures? So that's what I wanted to say in terms of the compensation. And then the whole issue about the National Empowerment Fund. In our fiscal framework presentation, we mentioned that the National Empowerment Fund has all of a sudden increased their allocation. I put it up in this document. So in terms of the selected performance indicators that they showed, they said that in 2024, they're going to spend 1.5 billion, and with that 1.5 billion, they're going to create 10,500 jobs. In 25, they're going to spend the same amount, 1.5 billion, but they're going to create 77,000 jobs. So how credible is that information that we get? But then the big issue now is the increase in the budget. of that specific entity is like, it increased from 1.5 billion in 25 to 20 billion in 26. And with that 20 billion, they're going to create 140,000 jobs. And in the outer year, they're going to spend 35 billion, and they're going to create 210,000 jobs. So we emphasized that specifically for us to actually not dig deeper, but get a sense of what it is all about. And I think it's all over the news what it is about. And then in addition to this,
I mean, just as a side point, it actually means it's 150,000 per job. That's unbelievable. I want that job.
but anyway, so this is the information in the E&E. So something else that I want to mention is the Treasury needs to assess this information before they publish it and send it back to the department, because if it doesn't make sense, then they must send it back and they must correct it. It might be a technical issue, it might not be a technical issue. But also in terms of duplication, many of you members actually indicated where can we find inefficiency, and in many instances we indicated there's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of transfers to entities, and in many instances we also don't get proper information to assess whether these entities are efficient and effective. So I just want to give you also an example in terms of the IDC. They spend exactly, they also spend money on the exact function what the National Empowerment Fund is spending money on. So there's just this one, a few that I want to mention. The value of funding disbursed per year. So disbursed to whom? But anyway, that value of money in 2024 was 21 billion, and next year 22 billion. Then there's the value of funds committed and facilitated for black industrialists per year. So it's the same kind of spending as the National Empowerment Fund, and that is 7.4 billion and 8.6 billion. The value of funds committed and facilitated for black-owned businesses and businesses with broad-based ownership per year. In 24, it was 12 billion. Next year, 14 billion, and that's how it actually got. So there is a duplication of function in terms of what they're indicating. But also what is interesting in terms of the IDC, this table is supposed to provide us with the selected performance indicators, but the entire table provides budget information, not performance indicators. So it's all in billions that they spend on certain things, but we don't know what they buy with these billions. So that's another issue, that the performance information in the budget should not present budget information, expenditure information. It should present performance information so that we can determine efficiency, what they spend the funds on. The other question was on slide 33, I think. That assessment, we just want to show you the COE as a percentage of the total vote. We did the calculation. This is the percentage, and we also did the calculation of the percentage transfer to other institutions. So to me, it's very logic. If you transfer all your money, do you still need a big component of personnel? Sometimes you do, to do oversight. I think we need to spend more on COE in corporate governance, for example, because we need people to do oversight, but they transfer the money to SALGA to do the oversight on their behalf. So if you just look at the departments that in the category of spending 80% in that amounts that they transfer to other institutions, some of them spend 5.6% on COE, some of them 8.6%, then there are some of them that spend 10.3% on COE. So it's not a direct comparison, but it can give you an indication. As I said, this gave us an indication of why the National School of Government needs to consolidate with or merge with their training entity, because they transfer 50%, of their funds, and they spend 29% on COE, so they're going to merge, and it's a small department. There are other examples as well, like there are other examples as well that we can mention. And then also in terms of, we also added 2 additional slides in terms of public entities, just a list of a few things in terms of public entities that are in the additional slides. And there's also an additional slide in terms of the proportions that the different provinces spend on education or health, and then the social function. So, as I said, it's difficult to determine how many of what we need to put in our presentation. We already had 50 slides and we wanted to reduce. So yes, thank you. Thank you.
Busi, you can go.
Okay, thank you. I'll be short. I think there were a lot of questions. I think just to contextualize why there was an overemphasis on local government, it's because actually the Select Committee earlier had asked us to do a study on Section 139 and 154, which is why we end up doing this work. So you are seeing preliminary outcomes of this work. It's continuing, and we will publish that work, and I think it will be very useful. We did get data from National Treasury. We actually requested the data. They gave us the status updates on the various municipalities, how they're implementing, what are the outcomes, and then we compared those to the audit outcomes of those municipalities, and then looked at the levels of basic service delivery. So I think it'll be useful to members. But also to emphasize what Neela said, maybe we do need a study on provinces. We do report on national, provincial, and local in our fiscal briefs systematically. So members do have access to that information. We send it to all the committees, and we show, like Neela said, COE and what's happening. And we also include the AGSA report in those. And of course, because they come in between the year and not between budget, I know it might not be, the thing that is on the top of the brain, but just to also just highlight to members that we do that kind of work. I think in terms of, there were questions around rural households, indigent households, and I think to reemphasize my point about the social wage, which is that we can't assume that it's equally distributed. Not everybody has access to basic services in the same way. So here we have an aggregate of what is spent on basic education, but schools that are poorer in rural areas will have higher teacher or learner to teacher ratios and so forth. So we are aware of that. And especially in terms of the indigent households, I think what is happening, and kind of like a short brief history of basic services in South Africa, is that our municipalities actually did better when we used to provide blanket free basic services. And over time, since 2000, what has happened is that we've removed that system of saying we provide blanket, if you live in a rural area in wherever, we remove the blanket free basic services, right? And so over time, that's where we get the prepaid meters and so forth. And then we see over time that our municipalities actually get worse off. So I think there's something to be said and to be understood about how then indigent households fall off, because the money allocated to local government for free basic services is not ring-fenced. So municipalities don't have to provide to all the indigent households that might come forward, right? So it's based on estimates, and municipalities will then use that money to address other financial distress. So again, it goes back to this question about the white paper, which has been mentioned many, many, many times, about funding. How do we fund it better? How do we better cater to households that need the free basic services? How do we better target, or maybe not target, maybe blanket approaches were easier because then we just knew it would be funded anyway, at least at the basic level. I think in terms of, there was a lot said about credibility, and I think what I want to pose about the growth question is that if we have said for the last, since 2015, which is the data I was highlighting, that our strategy for growth is infrastructure, right? But we're not spending in infrastructure, then we do not have a credible growth strategy, right? We're not investing more. So I guess what I'm trying to say to the Appropriations Committee is to say, if we say the credibility of our framework is about what we say we're going to invest in, are we really truly investing in it to then justify why growth has or has not happened? In terms of vulnerability to hunger, what we showed in our last slide, which is not in this slides, was that households that are actually grant recipients are increasingly becoming more vulnerable to hunger, which is why the emphasis on the 1.5% real increase in grants, right? So if more and more households are being vulnerable, then we need to think about, is that increase actually enough, including the VAT now that's being introduced? So you're going to see more households being more vulnerable to hunger. I think the other one was just in terms of Stats SA, I've got a lot. I think a lot of great surveys have been lost because of not funding Stats SA. You know, a simple thing is Stats SA used to do a time use survey, which told you about the unpaid care work that women do. It really showed how people spend their time. And we are in this process of implementing gender responsive budgeting, and we haven't had a time use survey since 2010. So I think Stats SA over time has lost a lot of great resources for us that could help make better decisions about budgets and how we think about them. And then lastly, I think, in terms of credibility again, in terms of the public sector wage bill, I think part of the problem is that in certain years, Treasury has underestimated what the increases are, deliberately so, right? I don't know if anyone remembers, I think it was 2019, 2020, or 2019, they said there'd be a 0% increase, right? The freeze. Of course, that was not credible. There was no way that the budget was going to be passed in that way and that public servants were going to take a wage freeze. So there's also a question about credibility around how we project increases in salaries over time. I think there's a debate around, are we arguing about the size of the public sector wage bill, or are we arguing about the cost about it, and what does that look like, right? Because we've got great needs in our country, so I can't imagine that would say we want less people, just like the data shows there that we've got, 0.3 doctors per, so we know that there's a need. So I think there needs to be a more nuanced discussion around the public sector wage bill, which might mean that Appropriations Committee says we actually need more money, but then also more people to then deliver the basic services that are needed. I don't know what the discussion would come to, but yeah, so I think those are basically, I'll let my colleagues add on more on that, but to really emphasize on free basic services as critical to local government specifically.
Can we be quick and strong? Yeah, I think.
Mukundi, do you want to come in?
Thanks. I think I'm mostly covered. All my issues have been addressed. All I can add is that, yes, indeed, COGTA is there's a review currently happening on the white paper on local government, and also National Treasury is doing some studies to refine funding of local government, which is meant to address some of the challenges that are happening within that sector. Thanks.
Kagiso, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I do think my colleagues did cover some of the areas that I wanted to cover, but I'll just reiterate a few important ones. I did want to talk about that AG report within my slides, but I was asked to speed up a little bit. It was more at an aggregate level. What I do want to highlight that's very important is that audit outcomes that talk about qualified and unqualified audits are very, very important indicators, but it's important that we also look beyond those and actually at what municipalities, how are they impacting communities. So there needs to be an assessment around that. The second thing that I wanted to touch on is the question on whether travel costs I think, yeah, honourable members, whether travel costs were included in our analysis. And you would have seen around the inequalities that we tried to cover that we clustered it according to low income, middle, as well as high income. So with rural households, they normally classified under low income groups or the first decile. And we did show that transport costs actually, or transport constitutes the third highest expenditure item for that household group. There was a question around, which my colleague Busi touched on, the learner to educator ratio. So we take that information from the Department of Basic Education. They publish what they call schools reality. We did highlight in the presentation that the figure does mask a lot of disparities in terms of the class sizes for rural, urban, as well as affluent areas, as well as it does not necessarily or maybe it does mask a little bit of disparities around migration by foreign countries. Some of that information is there, but I think we might need to sit down and try to triangulate some of those figures, but there still will be gaps because it is statistical data. And then in terms of the hunger, our slides did show that in terms of poverty, our slides did show that 9.3 million people experienced hunger, which is a good proxy for poverty. And it's taken from the latest statistics that we found from Stats SA, which is published in May. So the next statistics will be published this year for 2024. There's a bit of a lag there. And Honourable Member did ask about the areas, and food access problems are mostly seen in Northern Cape, Northwest. You see that according to the statistics, that provinces that are agricultural heavy don't actually have a high statistic compared to provinces that don't, such as Limpopo. And then the last question around higher education. Studies from Stats SA, as well as also published studies, find that for graduates who in terms of unemployment, those that have higher education actually have better job prospects than people who are not highly educated. So this does show that higher education is important, but there is an urgent need for jobs to be created by both the private and the public sector as more graduates are entering the job market.
Okay, right. We'll see one last point quickly.
No, I just wanted to highlight to members that as members are asking us to kind of do spending reviews, to put into prospect that it took GTAC, which is probably 10 times our size, 6 years to do spending reviews, right, that they've just recently published about. So to just kind of, in a way, expectation manage around that, to put into perspective, I think what we can do is provide, obviously, look at what GTAC has produced and so forth, but to just really emphasize how much capacity it takes to generate that kind of level of detailed spending review.
No, I mean, I think we've been served by the GTEC report. I'm merely asking, I think the question is to focus narrowly on some of the expenditure items that can be reduced for efficiency. That is it. It is. I'm not expecting you to redo what GTEC does. That's not what the committee is asking. So that was what the focus was.
Sorry. Yeah, also, members, when we started the PBO in 2014, we actually looked at the methodology that GTAC is using. And we actually said there's no ways that we will be able to use that methodology. Fantastic methodology, very detailed, but we just don't have the capacity to dig deep into expenditure items.
Yes, Raj, just quick response some of the areas around economic growth.
Yes, thank you. And just to reiterate what some of my colleagues have said, this is the capacity of the PBO you're seeing in front of you. And so, yeah, I mean, we do have to manage expectations and think about what we can do, even in terms of interpreting GTAC's work, but also in terms of understanding the level at which things that we call duplication is actually duplication in different spheres of government. And so we also don't have the ability to do that in every case. We may be able to come up with some cases. And in the last term, we did work on underspending, and I think that was really useful work, but it also was quite general work that drew on the numbers we got from Treasury and other places. My main response is on since I'm the Deputy Director of Economics, I thought I should respond to this notion of what causes growth. And I just want to say I've been in this job since 2016, and I haven't had a Member of Parliament say to the PBO that the ideas are wrong, pernicious, or damaging. I think, and also then to conflate certain ideas that are left fairly general with the idea that it represents certain bad players within the government or had been in the government. And so if I were to say that I think South Africa's economic structure in terms of the different sectors and our value chains and how much value we can add, and you know, we're too dependent on capital-intensive sectors rather than labor-intensive sectors that use more technology and value added. And I say then that therefore I think we need to transform the economic structure of the economy. I fear that I'd feel almost censored by what the Honorable Bateman said by saying, you know, that sounds like something somebody else said that then did bad things. And then to conflate those ideas, or the possibility of even not knowing those ideas that I'm saying are the ones that will be conflated but with the bad actors. So I think we need to be really careful in this relationship, because mine is one of subservience and yours is one of power, but mine is one of actually coming from what I believe to be a really deep, long-term standing of understanding and developing knowledge on this economy and what causes and what doesn't cause growth. So my first point is that we do know for a fact, based on the work of institutions on the left and the right, and international institutions that are credible, like the IMF, that when countries do adjust by pushing up using monetary policy to increase interest rates, or to fiscal consolidation, or cutting expenditure, or not spending more into the economy to stimulate the economy, and that experience has happened as we've seen over different periods, and we can show that, and it's been shown by different organizations, that does constrain growth. That does actually, and that is an understanding within the macro policy environment, that when you are going to use contractionary policy, when you're going to use disciplinary policy, that the cost of that is employment and growth. It's going to limit economic activity. And so there's a very simple relationship there. Now, reading that within a context, sorry, I see you shaking your head. So I think at some point maybe we need to have a discussion.
Just
Sorry.
summarize.
Yeah,
Just summarize.
okay.
Yeah.
I think
It's fine.
I'm going to ask, because you can have a bilateral, that's not how we conduct the meeting. It's
I'm
unhelpful.
sorry. Yes, I'm sorry about that.
So if you want to have a one-on-one, then that's not how. I'd rather you respond through me and to the particular
Yes.
points that are raised,
Yes, okay.
rather than address a bilateral. Otherwise,
Apologies, Chair.
next time I'll organize a meeting between the two of you, and then you understand what I mean?
Okay.
Can I just come in first, Chair? I think, sorry, Chair, through you. I raised it, I thought you saw me. Thanks.
No, Dr. Jan, I don't want to. This is a conversation that could go on all day.
No, but I think what I want to try to make it shorter instead of taking long. I just wanted to say, I would really like to propose that, if possible, members can come to visit the office and we have more engagements on these matters. I really would like to propose that, rather than we taking a lot of time to the committee, rather I'm open to that, to facilitate that engagement. And if I've asked the chairpersons that we are willing to sit with members.
That is accepted practice. I'm just trying to get us not into, because if it becomes interpersonal, it'll become inter-party. And then you'll have to debate what each party's ideology is. Because parties are here because they represent various ideological strands. So I'm just saying, if we want to then have a neoliberal, and then we can have a Keynes, and then we can keep going. We can have all day, and then the particular leanings and schools of thought that are represented here means we could really spend a year. Dr. Janchis, I don't want us to have I welcome your invitation. Members will utilize it in its fullest sense. May I ask Dr. Siraj just to conclude on their report, and then we can go from there.
Okay, so Yeah, I mean, in the interest of ending this meeting and possibly to promote dialogue outside with members, between members and the PBO outside of this meeting, I won't go too much into the rest of what I was going to talk about different theories of growth and what causes and what doesn't cause growth. I think that may end up taking up too much time, and it may also be disagreement, because there is disagreement within the economics profession. I suppose what I could end up saying is that we do understand that government, what's categorized as government consumption, which includes a lot of investment, and SOEs makes up from the expenditure way of calculating GDP and makes up about 30% of South Africa's GDP. So just directly, government and government spending is important. And I agree with the view that it is the private sector that has to be in the lead of driving growth and creating jobs, but then we have to seriously think about what we're defining as the private sector. Are we just talking about those large corporations that dominate most of the economy and in the top 20 or 25 by JSE market capitalization? Are we talking about the whole economy? And then we have to understand that that is not a black box. And what drives economic activity in different sectors and categories, small, medium, micro enterprises, are also very different. And that has to be taken into account within the huge income and wealth disparities within South Africa, where we see, for instance, 5 million people can spend more on housing and utilities than the whole expenditure of about 50 million people. And so what does that mean for growth? What does that mean in terms of how you define a private sector and what that private sector then will see as the incentives to grow? So I think there are a lot of important issues that we need to unpack, and I'm very happy to have the discussion. I'm happy to be disagreed with and told I'm wrong outside of this meeting. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
In closing, yes,
Dr.
no,
Janji.
yes, sir, thank you. Just to clarify, the point is that, as I said at the beginning of our presentation, we have to base our analysis on evidence-based. So I'm inviting members of parliament. I'm not inviting them, to debate ideology, but to share with them our evidence on based on analysis. I think that's need to be clarified. I think the point I wanted to close on is around the question whether the budget address inequalities and also so issues. And I think you see there's a upward adjustment from the MTPS proposals to now. But I think what we've always said, Chair and members, that at the end of the day, the budget itself has to commit to that, because somebody has to be held accountable for growth, employment, and reducing inequality. And then if we're saying budget has to be used to address those, so then the Minister of Finance has to be committed, just to commit to say this budget will reduce inequality by this much for the next year, and then Parliament can call him after a year. So you said this will do. What I'm saying is that on us should also be on the government side to say this is going to create employment, or this is going to reduce inequalities, and we have that information as Parliament. And after a year or 2 years, we call the minister or whoever will be responsible to say, has that happened? Because every day, our biggest concern is really the heart of the debate around the budget itself, in our view, is really moving away from it being just to be a budget, but really dealing with those issues. And if we are not able to commit to that at the beginning, let me give you an example. The midterm budget review, midterm development plan, or SONA, says we need 3% growth in the economy. The budget says we're going to have 1.8%. Already we're not going to realize those priorities just from the beginning. Then how do we reconcile the differences as a Parliament, and who we hold accountable in those differences over the medium term? So it is a very crucial point. In our view, that's how should budget be dealt with. And it's very, very important. Otherwise, we'll do the same things as somebody is saying. For next years, we're never going to see changes in that regard. Sorry, Chair, I just want to labor on the point. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, thank you. What I did request is, and I raised this yesterday with the FFC, the medium-term development plan is where much of some of the ideological leanings and that conversation comes. So I'm going to request that DPMRE come to the committee before we finalize, hopefully, the report, so that they can come in. That's where some of and the PBO attend some of our meetings, because that's where some of the ideological underpinnings sit. You express your ideology in rands and cents, but you give your positions on whether you think austerity, expenditure, all of that sits within that. So I think that we need to direct that conversation there, if I can request your indulgence. Honourable Wakelin.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me. On your point, there's just 3 other matters that also possibly require us to engage on. Sorry, I just need to get my notes here. The first one is the matter of, and I think you raised the matter of the skills master file. You did. So we can interrogate, I don't know if we're going to get education here to come and maybe just the answer on that question. Do they prioritize the NSFAS bill or the NSFAS budget based on the skills master plan? I think that's the question we need answers on. Because if not, that means that's work that has to be done very critically on your point that you raised. The second matter, and I think this young lady, I keep on listening to you and I like what you say, and you're very to the point, and I like that, is the second matter is the further debate between province and local government and the work they do. And I'm not certain if we're going to be able to do it this year still, but there must be a point in time that we need to consider the whole matter of mandate creep between province and local government, and cost allocation or budget allocation between the two. You get what I'm saying. So we need, I don't know how we're going to do that. I'm just concerned if it will be for this budget, and I'm not certain. The third matter is the debate around public wage. And on your point, and let me just read this quickly. Public wage bill and the different components that are affecting it, the number of employees, salary scales, performance, and what do we want to see? Because that's the question you're asking. You're saying you said all of this, but what is it that you want to see? And I'm not even sure if that even will be done this financial year. But we need to start kickstarting these processes. And I said to Andrew, you must please have a meeting with him and have coffee.
It's precisely why I asked that part of the work that we've got to do as a committee is when we prepare towards the medium-term budget policy statement to look at the outer year, because almost, if you like, that outer year gives you an opportunity to make some inputs that are significant to some of this. Because some of the savings, I said yesterday, you can sit here today and tell me, let's eradicate the SETAs. Well and good. You are not going to realize the savings this year. Forget it. So you need to think about what happens in that outer year, or at least a middle year conversation. On the 3 points you've raised, on the province and local government mandate, scope creep, constitution, all of these matters, the Motlanthe high-level panel report had dealt with some of this work. And I think, again, this is a conversation that must be fully anchored with the DPMRE in some ways, because I think they are best capacitated to deal with that. I think on NSFAS we're on board, and I do think there must be a process that we begin to ask the question about the public sector wage bill, as I did raise it with the Deputy Minister of Finance, and I think that's where that will sit. I'm very anxious to try and put, because I also want us as policymakers as policy and lawmakers to not abdicate our responsibility as Parliament goes to almost, if you like, subordinate it to PBO or FFC or anybody. It then becomes the genuine work of what policy lawmaking becomes. And I think we mustn't, when we do our report as a committee, I think these matters need to be ventilated well in there. Sfiso, I hope you've taken note of some of this discussion as we put together that report. Let me thank the PBO for coming through and appreciate your time Yeah, and I really do want to say, obviously, that the difficulty is to always make a tough decision about what to leave or what to take in. So I appreciate the extent of work and the erudite nature of what you want. We will take you up on that invitation. We will write formally on the request for those expenditure cuts. Honorable Bateman, that matter was put forward. And then we are all under time pressure thanks to the budget postponement. So if you want somebody to blame for the time pressure, I'm gonna put you under, blame the Minister of Finance or Parliament. I don't know, blame someone. But we do need the work before the report is put together. So we've got public hearings next week on Monday and Tuesday. Can I give you, will write and request that if it can be done before the Friday, not this Friday, that one. Ndakenza. Thank you. Let me, before you depart, we've got just a few business things. If you are going to, if you can do so quietly and succinctly, but we've got minutes that we've got to take from the last, and then I've got one other thing. So either you sit through it or you do so quietly, but if we can. Honorable members, we've got to, Honorable Khanyan, if we can, we've got minutes to consider that we started yesterday from the 19th of March. The inputs that were requested by Honorable Bateman have been included and adjusted accordingly. I will again take the opportunity to go through the minutes in quickness. So, having considered page 1 and 2, and yesterday we did accept, so can I go through it again? Page 3, 4, 5, 6, page 7, yebo.
One typo, which is my fault. In the last paragraph, the word countries should be companies, not countries.
Okay. Page 8, page 9. With that in mind, is there any member who would like to, with that one adjustment of spelling, is there a member who would like to move for the adoption of the minutes? Thank you, Honorable Bateman. Is there a seconder? Honorable Khanyan. Thank you very much. With that, we dispense of those minutes accordingly. May I ask, Honorable Member?
Minutes of 19 March.
Oh, there are minutes of 19 March.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, these were the 18th. Sorry, I've got to find the 19th. I apologize, Honorable Members. I just needed to. Can I ask you to get them for me in the meantime, Darren? I don't have them in front of me. I thought we only had one set, but if I can pause that item while I find them, can I just deal with one matter quickly? If you find them for me quick. On the Friday, I had a meeting yesterday, or I had a conversation with the chairperson of Finance. And Finance are considering their report that has to be debated on Wednesday, which means we share members between Finance and us, which means they need to correct. And we've had this before. In the interest of synchronizing the two, I then propose that because our meeting is virtual, if I can request that we start our meeting at 8 a.m. as opposed to 10 or 9:30 as it was scheduled. This way, Finance will start their meeting at 10:30, then proceed, and we can finish our meeting in 2.5 hours. Could that be agreeable with members? Because I think it will help us at least accommodate Finance, but also deal with where we are. Honorable Wakelin?
Just a question, who will be affected here? I think we
Well-
are really reasonably covered.
The members here, Honorable Khanyane, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko, there's a couple. Even the MK members will be affected and some of the other members. Honorable Bateman?
Chair, is that 8 a.m. on the 2nd of Next week.
No, it's 8 a.m. on Friday. This Friday coming. Ngolwesihlanu. It's Friday before the NEC. No. I don't bring another. It is naturally a virtual, so there's no travel. You can log in. If you can log in at 8 a.m. and we've asked Salga to do the same, etc., etc. So
I might have a break because my flight is at 8 until 9. But as and when I'm...
okay, that's fine. We really are trying to, honorable members, trying to do our best to accommodate, particularly in the finance cluster, it becomes problematic. So that's that. Let me then take back to the minutes. These are the minutes of the 19th. It was a briefing by National Treasury. Can I go through these? Page 1 is just front, page 2 is just the attendance register, and then it goes through presentation. Can I check page 3? Are there any objections to those? Page 4? Page 5? Yebo.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered about the paragraphs. The committee expressed the view that the structure of government must be changed to do away with the provinces, especially that they're the point where corruption occurs. I just thought that's quite a strong statement to reflect
Sure.
as the views of the committee. Maybe we should just soften that and just say debate the merits or something like that.
I agree. If we can amend it to reflect not a resolution that says provinces must fall. Although that is my personal view. This has been a chronic debate. I'm sure we can have it for some time. Page 6, with that amendment, and we'll page 7. Darren, this thing is broken. I don't know. You know, ThinkPads and Apple. Why can't the government give you Apple computers? We'll do a spending review. Can I ask, with that minor adjustment to the sentencing, I don't think it will be significantly changing the minutes of the meeting, other than just to, and I can circulate that note around. Oh, sure. No. A member who chairs the meeting. No. We can I then ask if there's a member who would move for the adoption of the minutes with that adjustment? Honorable Wakelin, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko. Thank you very much. May I then, in the light of that, ask Mashile, if you can talk to us. I see Nomfus is here, and thank you for the hard work you are putting into this oversight. I'm really appreciative of what you put together. Lebo Mashile. Mashile, let me hear from you the arrangements for the weekend.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you so much, Chairperson. I'll just be very quick. In fact, the arrangements are underway, and we're just about to finalize the last parts, the last phase of the arrangements. The public hearing will be held in the Limpopo province. To be specific, the venue for the public hearing would be the Jake Botes Hall in Polokwane, and that is the Polokwane local municipality, but the larger one is the Capricorn District Municipality. I'm pleased to say that we've been in contact with the external and internal stakeholders. The invites had gone to the external stakeholders, the civic organizations, including, among others, the South African Council of Churches, SALGA, the Contralesa, as well as the House of Traditional Leaders Association in the province. And internally, we've had a series of meetings with the internal stakeholders. The language services, the PCMS, the sound and vision, they are upbeat with the preparations. They've just committed that they will be supporting us throughout the course of our public hearings. What I've done after the meeting had commenced today, I've circulated the proposed program for the day of the public hearings. It's 1 day. And I'm not sure if members have just checked it. I didn't caution you on that. It was circulated today. But basically, the intention is for members and staff to leave Cape Town on Monday, the 31st, for Petersburg, after which they will be having the public hearing on the following day. All those that are in the items that are involved in there would just be the breakfast in the morning at the hotel, preferably that would be the Fusion Hotel in Petersburg, and the public hearings are supposed to be starting at 10 o'clock exactly. But in terms of the program that was sent to you, we would have some activities shortly before the commencement. That would be the settling down when members settle, when we do have the formal introduction and the laying of the rules and others, and the introduction as well. We are expecting to be joined by the leadership, maybe from the province, either from the National Treasury or the legislature, and from the municipality. We've made provision for the introductions that might cover the leadership from the district municipality or the local municipality, depending on their arrangement. And the intention is for members and staff to leave Polokwane the same day after the completion of these proceedings to Johannesburg to sleep over for the flight in the following morning. But I think Sis Nomfusi will talk to that. I think there was a provision for members either to sleep over or to go directly, to come directly to Cape Town. But we had considerations with regard to whether it would be safe for members to land here at around 11 o'clock in the evening. Okay, for the sitting on a Wednesday. But then, initially, we had planned that the sitting, the session will run up to 4 o'clock. But after reflection, we considered that no, we would stop at 3 o'clock, and then we would not have a lunch; we would have a working lunch. Thank you so much, Chair.
Yes, the working lunch is in fact, it's not a working lunch, Mr. Maubani. Clarify that we have resolved to join our fellow Muslim South Africans in the principle of Ramadan. Clarify these points so that members don't get confused. So it will be a fasting lunch. Put it that way. Nomfusi. Just before you speak,
Is this an austerity hearing?
it is part of the budget cuts. Yeah.
Good day, honorable members and colleagues. On Monday, the 31st, the delegation will leave from different provinces and catch a connecting flight in OR Tambo at 20 past 4. Honorable Wakelin will connect at 25 to 10. Yes, you have requested an earlier flight on Monday. And in Polokwane, at the airport, the ground driver will be waiting for the members to transfer them to the hotel. On day 2, the 1st of April, the delegation will check out in the hotel in the morning because after the hearings, we are going straight to the airport for the connecting flight to Joburg, Polokwane to Joburg. Then the flight on that day is at 25 to 6. The flight in Joburg to Cape Town is at 9:05, and the members that are flying on that day will land at before 11 or after 11 that day. But there is a provision for members who want to sleep over in Joburg around the airport so that they can catch the flight early on the 2nd of April. And Chairperson, there is a provision for the public for catering. Catering have been organized. In the morning, the public will receive fruit bags and water, then lunch after the hearings. And transport has been organized for them to take them from their districts to the hall. We are organizing, there's another committee assistant who's assisting me. We are going to be busy couriering the documents to the hotel for the public hearings. I think I'm finished now. Thank you.
Nkosi Mama, let me just say to members, this is the first time we've ever gone to ground on the appropriations bill, and I think it'll be historic for us. We've got to put as much as we can into the whole thing, so we hopefully will get right. Honorable Kalega Mazibuko, no, before you go, I recognize Honorable Wakelin first. Yeah. Okay, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chair, I agree with you. I think we are breaking the record in terms of going on the ground for the first time. And I do understand that we would have gone earlier if it was not because of the postponement of the budget presentation. So my skepticality is that, you know, when you do something for the first time and people get excited and they would want us to deliberate, so time might be a problem.
Sure.
Next time, at least if we could, you know, do this exercise earlier to give people ample opportunity. Because now I assume on Tuesday we'll have to cut people and say 5 minutes, 3 minutes, because we are rushing to come back. So, but I do believe that with time we will then improve in terms of.
We'll go to other provinces. That's part of my arrangement with Honorable Frolik to say we are starting in Limpopo. For the MTBPS, we may very well end up in the Eastern Cape, etc., etc. So you might go that way. Honorable Wakelin.
Thank you, Chair. Just my apologies. If I'm happy to fly also at 4 o'clock, if you can arrange that, because my logistics has also changed on Sunday. So I'm going to be in Joburg anyway, so it's fine.
Honorable Mkonto, if there are individual arrangements, you can make them so, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. As the last born of this committee, I'll always come with with questions that everyone might be having answers. What is the theme or the topic of these public hearings?
This is the consideration on the division of revenue bill. So members of the public it's a law, so they have to comment on the budget effectively, if I could put it that way. With all of those arrangements and planning, honorable members, we will see each other virtually on Friday morning at 8 a.m. Please, we'll send a reminder on the group, and then let us then see each other in Polokwane on Monday for those members, and then let's convene on Tuesday. With those remarks, thank you to Mashile. I want to reiterate again, thank you to the team that is working day in, day out to try and make this. It's a logistical way we would have never anticipated, because you think in simple terms, even in a community, when you go to Polokwane, you assume everybody can read. Jordan, can you lift the E&E? Can read all of that. Some of this needs to also translate it for community members so that it's available in languages. All of this logistics has to take place. So with that in mind, it's a lot of work, and I'm truly appreciated. Thank you very much, honorable members. The meeting is closed.